Chapter 1009. The next morning, Zhang Xiaohua woke up as soon as the sun rose. He removed the restriction at the entrance of the cave and around the dream before walking out of the cave. He had obtained many jade slips from the cave behind the waterfall, and they were all Taoist teachings of Venerable Fiery Dragon. Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry to count them as he had already kept them in his belt. He would look at them when he had the time. The morning of Horned Dragon Mountain was no different from the other mountain ranges. The crisp chirping of birds, the fresh air, and the occasional roar of unknown beasts could be heard. Unknown little wildflowers were blooming quietly. Regardless of whether there was anyone around to admire them, the sparkling dew on the tall wild grass was glowing. Zhang Xiaohua stood in a spacious area and finished practicing the Fist of the North Star. He then picked up the Great Wisdom Sword and practiced the Tong Tian Staff technique that he had been pondering and comprehending for the past 10 days. The sky-piercing staff technique was the same as the Big Dipper Fist technique. After Zhang Xiaohua's memory was erased, there were only 360 moves left. Over the past 10 days, Zhang Xiaohua had been trying to string these moves together. Perhaps it was because of Zhang Xiaohua's experience in practicing the Big Dipper Fist technique, but it wasn't too difficult to string these 360 moves together. However, he had been working hard and didn't have any extra time to practice. He closed his eyes and recalled the entire staff technique in his mind. Zhang Xiaohua picked up the long sword and prepared to practice the moves one by one. However, just as he was about to practice the first move, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. The moves of the Tong Tian staff technique were all staff moves, and most of them required 2 hands to hold the staff. His Great Wisdom Heavy Sword was a sword embryo, and only the sword hilt was comfortable to hold with 1 hand. The other places were wide and thick, and he couldn't hold it with 1 hand. Therefore, using this staff technique was rather awkward. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua braced himself, and used his left hand to grab the sword embryo's heavy sword. He used Bo Ruo as a staff to dance, but, after struggling to perform a few more moves, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and threw Bo Ruo to the ground. He thought to himself, "It seems that this staff technique still needs to use a staff. That day, I thought wrong. I thought that if I could use the heaven-shocking staff Bo Ruo, then the staff technique should be able to be used as well. Sigh, what a pity. This Tong Tian staff technique seems to be extremely powerful." When Zhang Xiaohua's gaze landed on the small tree at the side, his eyes unconsciously lit up. He walked over and pulled out the small tree that was as thick as a duck egg. Using the short sword, he cut off the branches and used it as a staff to dance. After a few moves, Zhang Xiaohua shook his head again. "This small tree is too light. It's as light as grass. When I dance it, there's no feeling at all." After that, Zhang Xiaohua found another one that was as thick as a bull. Needless to say, it was much heavier than the previous one. However, this time, it was even more uncomfortable. Apart from the light weight, Zhang Xiaohua could not completely hold the small tree with 1 hand. Holding it was also uncomfortable. Sigh! Zhang Xiaohua only used a few moves before throwing the small tree to the ground again. He angrily said, "This is really uncomfortable. In the past, I had the Great Wisdom Sword but did not have a matching move. Now that I have a move, but do not have a matching weapon. What can I do? What can I do? Xiaohua, who are you angry with?" It was Meng's concerned voice that asked. Zhang Xiaohua raised her head. Meng was standing at the place where the sun shone. Her white skin was especially soft under the orange sunlight. Her pitch-black hair fluttered in the mountain wind, making her look like a flying fairy. Zhang Xiaohua felt a burst of sweetness in her heart. She smiled and said, "It's nothing. Didn't I see a set of staff techniques at the Dalan Temple a few days ago? I took it out today to try it out. Who knew that I did not have a suitable weapon? That staff technique was a waste of time." "Haha," Meng grinned and said. "As the saying goes, skills are not a burden. If you can learn a little more, then learn a little more. Weapons are a small matter. You will slowly come across them in the future. That staff technique is something from the Dalan Temple's Hidden Scriptures Pavilion. This is probably your only chance to enter it in your lifetime. Zhang Xiaohua spread out her hands and said, "You're right. I thought so too. But when I think of not being able to practice the staff technique, my heart always feels uncomfortable." "Well," Meng pursed her lips and said, "if it's possible, when we return to the Lingxiang Peak, I will earnestly ask the hierarch to bestow you a weapon. Anyway, there are many weapons in the weapon refining hall." "That's right. How could I forget?" Zhang Xiaohua patted her head. Her gloomy face turned bright. "Ren Xiaoxia, Ren Xiaoxia." Chu Zhigao was thrown out from the distant cave again. A child was also cheerfully following behind him. "Jing, come here. This is the person who saved you yesterday." "Ren Xiaoxia." Chu Zhigao first pointed at Meng. Then, he remembered that Meng did not introduce herself yesterday. He could only point at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Thank you, Hero Ren, for saving my life." Jing was extremely obedient. He fell to the ground and kowtowed. Zhang Xiaohua quickly pulled him back and said with a smile, "Yesterday, I really did not save you. The one who saved you was my senior. You can call her Zixia Heroine." "Yes, thank you, Zixia Heroine, for saving my life." Jing kowtowed in front of Meng again. Quickly get up." Meng was happy to see that Jing was sensible. She pulled him up and thought for a moment. Then, she took out a jade bottle and handed it to him. "This is the Yahuandan pill from my incense sect. It is most effective for healing injuries. I heard that when you meet a child, you have to give a greeting gift. I don't have anything here, so take this as a greeting gift." Chu Zhigao was slightly surprised when he heard this. Who in the Jianghu didn't know the name of the Yahuandan pill? It was a godly item for healing injuries. He had only heard of it, but had never seen it before. At this moment, Jing turned his head and looked at Chu Zhigao. He was probably asking for something. Chu Zhigao wanted to shake his head, but Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Accept it. This is a token of appreciation from Zixia Heroine. It's rare for someone to call her a heroine for the first time. She is very happy. Don't disappoint her." Chu Zhigao nodded slightly when he heard this. Jing took the Yahuandan pill and skipped back to Chu Zhigao's side. He passed the jade bottle to Chu Zhigao. "Thank you, Zixia Heroine, for your generous gift." Chu Zhigao cupped his hands and thanked her. Then, he carefully kept the Yahuandan pill. Then, he asked carefully, "Ren Xiaoxia, my mother, has rested for a night. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. She patted her forehead and said, "Brother Chu, I will unseal your mother's acupoints now." The four of them walked to the front of the cave. Zhang Xiaohua turned around and said, "Meng, you go to the cave next door first. It won't be too late for you to come out after I ask Brother Chu." Meng didn't say anything. She nodded slightly and entered the cave where she rested last night. Jing's grandmother was still lying on the straw and sleeping soundly. When Zhang Xiaohua unsealed her acupoints, she first opened her eyes quietly. When she saw that she was in an unfamiliar place, she immediately panicked. However, when she saw her son and grandson, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. She asked, "Jing, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Grandma. Thanks to Hero Ren, I'm fine." "Hero Ren?" Jing's grandmother only saw Zhang Xiaohua now. She thought about what happened yesterday and struggled to get up. However, she was stopped by Zhang Xiaohua and said, "You don't have to thank me. I just happened to come at the right time. I saw injustice on the road, so of course I had to help. Moreover, I met Brother Chu before and received some benefits from Brother Chu. Yesterday was my repayment." Jing's grandmother looked at Chu Zhigao. Chu Zhigao smiled and said, "Mother, didn't the boy tell you about Lu Town before? This Ren Xiaoxia is the one who saved the boy." "Ah?" Jing's grandmother was even more delighted. "Then I have to thank him even more." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "Don't be anxious. Last night, I have already told Brother Chu some things. Let him tell you slowly in the future. In the future, we will be together for a long time. It's really troublesome to thank him. If you want to thank me, you'd better listen to what I have to say first." Jing's grandmother looked at Chu Zhigao. When she saw Chu Zhigao nodding, she smiled and said, "Since Xiaoxia said so, I won't insist any more. Xiaoxia, what do you want to say? I'm all ears." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and told her about her dream. In the end, she said, "I know that perhaps Meng's mother killed Brother Chu's father. But this has nothing to do with Meng." Jing's grandmother waved her hand and said, "Xiaoxia, you are overthinking. Yesterday, when I saw Miss Xixia, I saw that she looked exactly the same as the sacred ambassador from 40 years ago. I was scared. Coupled with the incident at home yesterday, I was agitated. That's why I hope Ren Xiaoxia can forgive me for my rudeness." She then said apologetically, "Although I don't know the relationship between Miss Xixia and the sacred ambassador, but Jiqiang's father wasn't killed by the sacred ambassador." "Ah?" Zhang Xiaohua was surprised at first, but then she was pleasantly surprised. She said, "Grandma, you are right. How could I be wrong? My husband was a lay disciple of the Dalan Temple, but he wasn't welcomed in the Dalan Temple and never received any true teachings. Later, he met the sacred ambassador of the Dragon God sect and knew that he had some skills in alchemy, so he wanted to recruit him into the Dragon God sect. Who knew that the news was leaked and the Dalan Temple's law enforcement disciples were dispatched. They caught and killed many people. My husband had just met the sacred ambassador and didn't express his opinion. He was beaten dozens of times by the Dalan Temple, crippled of his martial arts, and expelled from the Dalan Temple. Later, he became depressed and died of a serious illness. It had nothing to do with the sacred ambassador." "Ah, that's good." Zhang Xiaohua let out a long sigh and said, "Then I am relieved. Otherwise, even if Brother Chu didn't say it out loud, he would feel a little uncomfortable in his heart." Then, "Grandma, can you tell me about your meeting with the sacred ambassador?" Zhang Xiaohua asked. "Did my senior look exactly the same as the sacred ambassador?" Grandma Jing thought for a moment and nodded. "If my memory is correct, Miss Xixia does look exactly the same as the sacred ambassador. Of course, it has been 40 years and I can't guarantee that my memory is accurate, but the two of them look very similar, that's for sure." -4. Chapter 10:10. Back then, I left Dragon Mountain and followed my husband to live in Poyang Town. My husband was considered a martial arts family, but there were very few people. In his generation, he was only a little stronger than me. He was the only one left. When he was young, he had just finished laying the foundation for his family's martial arts. The old man died of illness, so he didn't have time to teach him the rest of the martial arts. When I married into the family, his martial arts were still sloppy and ordinary. Later, in Poyang Town, he met a lay disciple of the Dalan Temple. That disciple introduced him to the Dalan Temple. Unfortunately, the lay disciples of the Dalan Temple weren't the main focus of the Dalan Temple's cultivation. They were only used as a way to consolidate the power of the secular world. My husband didn't receive any guidance from a brilliant master in the Dalan Temple. He could only follow a group of lay disciples of the Dalan Temple and work hard to expand the power of the Dalan Temple. When my husband slowly understood and regretted, he met the sacred ambassador of the Dragon God sect. The sacred ambassador showed him a mysterious martial arts skill and said that as long as my husband could learn the Dragon God sect's alchemy skills and refine the elixirs they requested, he would be allowed to practice the internal strength cultivation method of the Dragon God sect. My husband was naturally moved and wanted to agree on the spot. However, the sacred ambassador said that there were some other people who wanted to go with her. She asked my husband to think about it for one more day. When night fell, she would bring those people back and they would return to the Dragon God sect together. Unexpectedly, when night fell, the sacred ambassador didn't come. Instead, the law enforcement disciples of the Dalan Temple arrived first. When they saw my husband, they captured him without any explanation. Just as they were about to take him away, the sacred ambassador appeared again and asked my husband if he was willing to join the Dragon God sect. If he agreed, she would immediately rescue him. Unfortunately, before my husband could answer, an old monk from the Dalan Temple appeared and fought with the divine unveil. That magical martial arts made me feel. How should I put it? It was like watching a circus show when I was young. It was incredible. However, at the end of the battle, when there was no clear winner, the sacred ambassador suddenly clutched his abdomen and pointed at the monk, cursing how despicable the monk of the Dalan temple was. After that, he fled with a pale face. The monk of the Dalan temple chased after him. My husband was naturally brought back to the Dalan temple by the law enforcement disciples of the Dalan temple. About 10 days later, my husband was released. His kung fu was crippled and he looked dull. Later I had Jigao. My husband only taught him kung fu for a few years and then passed away. I felt that I couldn't live in Poyang anymore, so I took Jigao back to Dragon Mountain. Alas, although Jigao was talented, he didn't practice kung fu properly since he was young. Therefore, although he had inherited kung fu from his family, he could only run around Jianghu and make a living by selling his skills. Fortunately, the elixirs from Dragon Mountain are real and the medicinal plasters are effective. That's why we can barely make ends meet. Alas, it was this elixir that brought us a lot of trouble. The most dangerous 2 times were if Xiaoxia didn't save Jigao. I'm afraid Jigao would have died. After hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua knew what to do. She smiled and said, "This is fate between me and Brother Chu." Then, he thought for a moment and asked, "May I ask, Elder, how far is Poyang town from here? Does Xiaoxia want to go to Poyang to have a look?" Grandma Jing asked. "That's right. What you see doesn't mean that my senior sister has anything to do with the Tenria sect's sacred ambassador. Therefore, Poyang, we want to go there and have a look. Maybe we can find something." Haha, if Xiaoxia thinks like this, why don't you go to the Dragon God sect directly? If Miss Xixia has something to do with the Tenria sect, won't you know once you go there? Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly. We are disciples of the fragrant religion. We still have work to do. How can we go to the Tenria sect? We should wait until later. Haha, maybe when the heavenly king of the Tenria sect comes to our fragrant religion, we can ask him. In this case, it doesn't matter whether we go to Poyang or not. However, when Chu Jigao told her the location of Poyang, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Poyang is on our way back to the fragrant religion. It won't be too far away. Let's go and have a look." Poyang is the territory of the Dalan Temple. There are often disciples of the Righteous Alliance there. If Miss Xixia wants to find someone from the Dragon God sect, I'm afraid you have to be careful. Chu Jigao advised. Well, we are the emissaries of the fragrant religion. We also have the permission of the Law Enforcement Hall Elder. There shouldn't be a big problem. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and then asked, "Grandma, I heard from Brother Chu yesterday that your family's ancestor has been guarding something in the Dragon Mountain. What's going on?" Jing's grandmother frowned and stared at Chu Jigao. She smiled and said, "It's nothing. It's just a little promise from the ancestor. There's no need to go into details." "Mother," Chu Jigao said, "Ren Xiaoxia has already been to that place. Moreover, he went in. Didn't you say that the place was left by the ancestors for those who were fated to go there? Ren Xiaoxia is kind-hearted and warm-hearted. He should go to that place to have a look. Don't you think so? Ren Xiaoxia has already gone in?" Jing's mother was shocked and said, "That place, in the Dragon Mountain, for thousands of years, no one has ever been able to go in." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and nodded. "I did go in, but I don't have any proof. There are so many things inside. I reckon that you haven't seen any of them. How can you identify them? Xiaoxia, is there a portrait in there?" Jing's grandmother asked seriously. "Yes, but it's too old to be seen clearly." "Oh, then can the handwriting be seen clearly? Does Xiaoxia know whose portrait it is?" Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "I can't identify the handwriting. According to what I know, this portrait should be of Fiery Dragon Jinren." "Fiery Dragon Jinren?" Jing's grandmother was in disbelief. She opened her mouth wide and shouted, "Did you just say Fiery Dragon Jinren?" "Yes, it's Fiery Dragon Jinren. What's wrong with that?" Zhang Xiaohua asked, puzzled. Son, you don't have to guard the Dragon Mountain like me anymore. When Jinger's grandmother heard Zhang Xiaohua say the words Fire Dragon Spiritual Master, her face was already covered in tears. She couldn't help but cry. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand. After waiting for a while, Jing's grandmother stopped crying. She wiped her tears and said, I've made a fool of myself in front of Ren Xiaoxia. I don't dare to, please enlighten me. Sai, come to think of it, this was something that happened thousands of years ago. It was said that there used to be an immortal living on Dragon Mountain. One year, a young man with the surname Li eloped here with his beloved. Both of them were sickly and on the verge of death. They were saved by the old Immortal. However, both of them had poor aptitudes, and were only accepted as unofficial disciples by the old Immortal. He taught them some basic Immortal techniques. After that, the old Immortal went on a journey and instructed the young couple to guard this place well. If there was a fated person who could enter his cave and see the portrait, and say the name of the portrait, Fiery Dragon Jinren, that person would inherit his legacy. They and their descendants would no longer have to guard this place. Of course, the young couple and their descendants could enter and try. After the young couple agreed, the old Immortal left behind some superficial things and swaggered off. His whereabouts were never seen again. The young couple stayed behind to keep their promise and guard this cave residence. However, the world has undergone great changes. Not every generation of the Horned Dragon Mountain is a man who can inherit the family name. Over time, when it came to my generation, the family name was changed to Wan. If there are no accidents, the next generation of the Horned Dragon Mountain will change to Chu. Thank you for your hard work, old Immortal. I would like to express my gratitude to you and your family on behalf of Fiery Dragon Jinren. Zhang Xiaohua was very touched and bowed deeply. I wouldn't dare. Since you've promised Fire Dragon Immortal and have been rescued by him, of course, you'll have to guard the cave abode for him. After that, Jing's grandmother looked at Chu Zhigao and said, However, I have a presumptuous request. I hope Xiaoxia can fulfill it. Chu Zhigao smiled and said, Mother, if you want to help the boy, you don't have to. Ren Xiaoxia is a righteous man. He had already told the boy last night. You know the boy's talent. It's already very good for him to make a living in Jianghu. How would he dare to be like Ren Xiaoxia? Ren Xiaoxia has already promised that when the time is right, he will accept Jing as his disciple. Boy and mother can also settle down in his sect. Really? Jing's grandmother was very surprised and said, We will join the incense sect? Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and waved her hand. You've misunderstood. It's not the incense sect. Oh? Jing's grandmother immediately realized and said, Of course, Xiaoxia has received Old Immortal's orthodoxy. Naturally, he will use Old Immortal's sect. I just don't know which sect Old Immortal belongs to. My ancestor has never said anything about it. Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and said, This Old Immortal also doesn't belong to any sect. I have already boldly named it Beidu's school. I don't know if it's appropriate or not. When Jing's grandmother heard this, she clapped her hands and said with a smile, Old Immortal is indeed a fated person. It is recorded in ancient books that there are 7 stars in the Big Dipper. The first Tianshu Palace is the Life Star Lord. The second Merak Palace is the Silla Star Lord. The third Tianji Palace is the Lutsuan Star Lord. The fourth Tianquan Palace is the Longevity Star Lord. The fifth Yuhing Palace is the Calculator Star Lord. The sixth Kaiyang Palace is the Crossing Disaster Star Lord. The seventh Alcade Palace is the Benevolent Star Lord. The 7 Stars Lord is in charge of the survival of the world. They are in charge of the survival of the world. Xiaoxia's Beidu school is the leader of the Jianghu. It will definitely be able to suppress the incense sect and Tenria sect. It will become a famous sect in history. Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely and said embarrassedly, Old Immortal is flattering me. It's just that I am speaking without thinking. Don't take it seriously. Don't take it seriously. Jing's grandmother laughed and asked again. Then Xiaoxia's Beidu school. Is it going to be set up in Dragon Mountain? Old Immortal's cave is here. No. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hands. I'm still young. I can't take on such an important task. Let's talk about it in the future. Besides, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, there's nothing in Fiery Dragon Jinren's cave. It's not convenient to go in and out. Even if I have the chance to set up a sect in the future, I don't think it will be here. Jing's grandmother's face revealed a look of disappointment. -4. Chapter 10-11. Jing's grandmother's disappointment disappeared in a flash. She smiled and said, Big Dipper, I really hope to see the rise of the Beidou school. I want to see if my Jing can become the backbone of the Beidou school. As she spoke, she lovingly looked at Jing, who was nestled next to her as if he was listening to a story. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Yes, yes. Don't worry, Elder. When I finish the Beidou school, I will teach Jing the cultivation method. Jing's grandmother was waiting for him to say this. She pushed Jing and said, Jing, why aren't you coming to greet your master? Jing was stunned. He immediately prostrated himself on the ground and prepared to kowtow. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked and quickly jumped away. With a wave of her hand, Jing was unable to continue kowtowing. He hurriedly said, Elder, don't be like this. How old is this kid? How can you accept a disciple? This kid hasn't even finished practicing his martial arts. Jing's grandmother wasn't willing to listen. When she saw that Jing wasn't kowtowing, she thought that Jing didn't understand etiquette. She immediately used her hand to press down on his little head and kowtowed to the ground. However, it was as if there was a stone wall in front of Jing. No matter how hard Grandma Jing tried, she couldn't move Jing's head at all. Seeing that Jing's grandmother was obviously trying to cook the rice, Zhang Xiaohua was a little unhappy. However, looking at Grandma Jing's attitude towards Jing, it seemed to be the same as how her grandmother treated her in the past. As long as there was something that could benefit her, her grandmother would do it even if it meant losing her face. For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't bring herself to be angry. She could only wave her hand and said, Elder, don't make things difficult for this kid. Since this kid has promised to let Jing practice martial arts, he will definitely keep his promise. If you continue to force him, it won't be good. Grandma Jing knew that she couldn't do it. Her face was slightly red, and she said awkwardly, Xiaoxia. Zhang Xiaohua chuckled softly. Elder, there's no need for you to say anything. It's not shameful to do something that goes against one's conscience for one's descendants, and I can understand that. I'm already grateful that you were able to clarify the matter regarding my senior. At this moment, Dream, who was outside the cave, asked softly, Xiao Yao, how is it going? It turned out that Zhang Xiaohua had been asking for a long time. Meng had been waiting impatiently in the cave for a long time. After hesitating for a while, she finally walked over and asked anxiously, Senior sister, you came at the right time. The old man has already told us about the matter. It's different from what we thought yesterday. And the old man also gave us some clues. Let's go to Poyang Town to take a look. When Grandma Jing saw Meng, she didn't panic like she did yesterday, but she still hurriedly got up to greet her. This woman might be the daughter of the sacred ambassador of the Dragon God sect. Now, her status was much nobler than that of a disciple of the fragrance cult. How could she dare to disrespect her? When Zhang Xiaohua repeated the matter again, Meng's face was a little red. She said, Thank you for telling us about the situation. I can't repay you. If you have any problems in the future, please send a message to the fragrance cult. I'll do my best to help. Grandma Jing repeatedly said that she didn't dare. Then, Zhang Xiaohua said to Chu Zhigao, Now time is tight. I still want to go to Poyang Town with my senior. No matter whether we can find anything or not, we have to hurry back to the fragrance cult. We can't stay here any longer. If there's any progress in my Beidou school, I'll come to Brother Chu. Chu Zhigao cupped his hands and said, When Ren Xiaoxia summons Chu Zhigao will definitely come. Go up and shout? Zhang Xiaohua was sweating profusely. What the hell was this? Then, Zhang Xiaohua and Meng said goodbye to Chu Zhigao's family of 3. They hurriedly went down the mountain according to Chu Zhigao's instructions. Poyang town wasn't too far from the Dragon Mountain, so they arrived in a few days. On the way, Meng's gloominess gradually disappeared. She also talked and laughed. Although she wasn't very sure about her identity, two women who looked exactly the same in the world, with a difference of more than 20 years, were not mother and daughter. If they weren't mother and daughter, who would believe it? Therefore, Meng was almost certain that the sacred ambassador of the Tenria sect was her mother. Now, what she needed to do was to go to the Tenria sect to find her mother. As for going to Poyang town today, Meng and Zhang Xiaohua had the same feeling. It didn't matter. Since it was on the way, they should go and see if there were any clues. However, when they got closer to Poyang town, Zhang Xiaohua's expression became more and more strange. When Zhang Xiaohua reached the town entrance, she became really excited. She patted her deer and went straight into the town. She didn't ask passers-by for directions like before. Meng was happy and didn't ask her. She thought that Zhang Xiaohua was trying to confuse the mysterious person who might be following them, so she patted her horse and followed. However, Zhang Xiaohua's performance surprised her. She saw Zhang Xiaohua riding her deer as if it was her own home. She turned left and right and went through a few alleys very familiarly. Finally, she stopped in front of a big restaurant. Meng looked at the plaque of the restaurant that wrote, "Food is God," and said with a smile, "Xiaohua, I was wondering why you were running so fast. So your nose has already smelled the fragrance of food?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed and was very carefree. She jumped down from her deer and said, "I won't talk to you now. Come, come, come. Try this restaurant's spicy chicken giblets." Spicy chicken giblets? Meng was surprised. Have you been to this restaurant before? At this time, in front of the restaurant, there was still an endless stream of people and carriages. It seemed that the business was more prosperous than before. Zhang Xiaohua led her deer to the door. There was a waiter standing in front of the door. He was not old and was sweating profusely. However, he was methodically greeting every customer who came in. When the waiter saw Zhang Xiaohua, his eyes immediately lit up and said with a smile, "Dear customer, did you come from afar? Please take a seat." Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. You can tell?" "Of course." The waiter smiled charmingly and said, "This humble one has worked in this restaurant for 3 years, and is familiar with everyone in town. Your face is unfamiliar, and you're riding a horse with a weapon on it. Needless to say, you must be a martial arts hero from the Jianghu. You must have some important business in town. If this humble one can't recognize you, how can I still be a waiter in this restaurant?" While they were talking, a person walked out of the restaurant and scolded, "Ma Xiaoxi, the customer came from afar and is hungry. Why aren't you inviting the customer in? What are you nagging about?" Zhang Xiaohua was even more delighted when she saw this person. Wasn't this the waiter who greeted her when she came to Food is God 5 years ago? She thought that she would not be able to meet him this time, but she actually met him again. "Shopkeeper, this little one will invite the customer in now," Ma Xiaoxi said with a smile. "Shopkeeper?" Zhang Xiaohua was startled. She then cupped her hands and said, Shopkeeper, this little one came from afar and I have some questions. I wonder if shopkeeper has some free time?" The shopkeeper frowned. However, when he saw Zhang Xiaohua's strange horse and the weapon on it, as well as Meng's clothes behind her, he smiled and said, "This little one has to personally welcome a guest from afar." As he spoke, he called for the waiter to bring Zhang Xiaohua's David's white horse to the side. He personally led Zhang Xiaohua to the private room on the 2nd floor. When Zhang Xiaohua entered the main hall, she looked around with joy on her face. Then, she found a table and sat down. Not only was the shopkeeper frowning, but Meng was also puzzled. She walked to his side and asked, "Why don't you go to the 2nd floor?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at her and then at the shopkeeper. She said meaningfully, "This place is good. Isn't it lively?" When he saw Zhang Xiaohua looking at him, the shopkeeper was also puzzled. He could only smile apologetically and said, Yes, yes, this guest is right. This main hall is indeed lively. Following which, a waiter came over with a teapot and poured tea for Zhang Xiaohua and Meng. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and asked, "Does this tea cost money?" "Yes?" The waiter was startled and said, 6 copper coins for a pot. This is the rule of our Food for the Heavens restaurant. It is also approved by the government. Hee, all right. Zhang Xiaohua nodded her head. After the waiter poured the tea, the shopkeeper took the menu and said, "Guests, please take a look at the menu. What would you like to order? If there isn't anything delicious on the menu, I can give you a few of our restaurant's secret dishes. These dishes aren't written on the menu. This little one saw that you are a guest from afar, so I prepared them for you." "All right, shopkeeper, please tell me." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said. Sure enough, the shopkeeper only listed a few dishes. He was still eloquent, and extremely pleasant to listen to. Even Meng was attracted to him. "All right." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and waved her hand. She said, "I won't order anything else. Give me a portion of the dishes that you listed. It doesn't have to be too much. Just a small portion will do." "Yes, guest." When the shopkeeper heard, he smiled and said, "Please wait a moment. This little one will get the chef to prepare it." When the shopkeeper was about to turn around, Zhang Xiaohua called out again and said, "Give me another plate of spicy chicken giblets." "Spicy chicken giblets?" The shopkeeper was stunned and said, "Guest, please wait a moment. It will be served immediately." "Oh right, how much is this spicy chicken giblets?" "Guest, you should know that spicy chicken giblets are 55 copper coins a plate." "Ah? 55 copper coins?" Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. "Why is it so expensive? I remember that it used to be 45 copper coins. Moreover, the tea is also 5 copper coins a pot." "Sir, are you an old customer of my Food for Heaven?" The shopkeeper understood immediately. He smiled and said, "I was wondering why you looked so familiar." The current Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the Zhang Xiaohua of the past. She naturally knew that the shopkeeper was just being polite. She waved her hand and said, "Yes, when I came here that year, you were just a waiter. Now, you are already the shopkeeper. Oh, you are indeed an old customer. Don't say any more. Guest, please wait a moment. This little one will pass the dishes to the chef first. I will immediately come over and chat with you. The dishes on your table, today, will definitely have a 50% discount." The shopkeeper said and left. Not long later, he came back with a wine pot and sat beside Zhang Xiaohua with a smile. "Please vote for me. Please vote for me. Please keep it. Please tip me. Thank you." -4. Chapter 10-12. After the shopkeeper left, Meng asked, "Xiaohua, when did you come to this restaurant?" 5 years ago? Zhang Xiaohua said meaningfully. "Back then, I spent 50 copper coins to have a meal here." "Ha, 50 copper coins!" Meng gradually understood the meaning of 50 copper coins after leaving the chanting incense cult. She couldn't help but chuckle. But before she could finish laughing, she suddenly woke up and grabbed Zhang Xiaohua's arm. "Xiaohua, you said 5 years ago? Wasn't that when I met you?" "Yes, that's right." Zhang Xiaohua nodded solemnly. "It was 5 years ago when I met you in Shirtai outside Poyang town. God bless me, God bless me." Meng's eyes were almost filled with tears when she heard that. She clasped her hands together and thanked God sincerely. Meng's memories started when she met Shirtai. If they could find the place where she met Shirtai, they would most likely be able to find her origins. However, Meng followed Shirtai back to the chanting incense cult and never came out again. Shirtai also didn't tell her where she met Meng. Later, Shirtai was killed and Meng didn't know where she met Meng. The great master Chang Gung of the Daolan Temple wrote Poyang Town's name on the list. But before they could find Poyang Town, they gave up. If they didn't meet Chujigao at Dragon Mountain, they probably wouldn't have come here to take a look. "Then, why don't we hurry over and find that fairy and thatched cottage?" Meng was a little anxious. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Since we're already here, and there's no Chu San Feng here, I presume that the mysterious person behind us doesn't know where to start. Moreover, the most important thing is that when you left with Shirtai that day, I came out alone. I don't even remember the path I took. If I don't investigate clearly, how am I supposed to find it?" "Yes, I understand." Dream nodded. As he spoke, the shopkeeper came over with a jug of wine in his hand. He sat down beside Zhang Xiaohua and said with a smile, "Have you been here before? Forgive my poor eyesight, but I didn't think of it. Hee, food comes first. How many people come in and out of the restaurant every day? If the innkeeper remembered, then food comes first would have already. What you said makes sense." Sigh. Back then, when the innkeeper saw that an outsider actually remembered him in the past, he felt rather emotional. As he drank, he bragged about his past. Actually, it was quite simple. The innkeeper was just quick and nimble in handling matters. He was recognized by the old innkeeper, and the old innkeeper betrothed his only daughter to him. While the innkeeper was bragging, the waiter served a few secret dishes and the spicy chicken offal. Looking at the spicy chicken offal that had existed in her memory for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua felt extremely emotional even before she tasted it. That was then, and this was now. In just 5 years, the vicissitudes of life had changed so much. Eh? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly asked curiously. "Innkeeper, your chicken offal is obviously much lesser than before. Why is it more expensive? As a person, it's better to be more honest." Who knew that the innkeeper didn't blush at all? He shook his head and said, "You don't know. This food comes first was left behind by the old innkeeper. How would I dare to smash the signboard? It's just that in these few years, the price of meat has skyrocketed. Not to mention other things, the pork that ordinary people eat has increased exponentially." "The price of pork has increased? What does it have to do with chicken offal?" "Dear customer, if the price of pork has increased, won't the people who eat meat have to spend more money? Where will the money come from? It's nothing more than the price of rice and the price of things to buy. If these things increase, won't the price of the people who buy these things increase as well? Then, not to mention other things, won't the price of the ingredients, feed, and waiter in the other shop increase as well? Since the price of feed will increase, won't the price of the chicken offal or chicken offal in the other shop increase as well? If that's the case, won't the spicy chicken offal in front of you increase in price as well?" Zhang Xiaohua was flabbergasted and speechless. He'd been wholeheartedly focused on cultivating the immortal Tao and had never imagined that the affairs of the world would be so complicated. How could a small restaurant like this contain so much knowledge? How could it reveal so many things in the world? Karma! Karma! Unknowingly, the hand of karma in the heavenly Tao galaxy became a little clearer. Dear customer, dear customer? When he heard the manager's call, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have awakened from a dream. He was jolted awake from his immersion in the comprehension of karma. Come, guest. Try my spicy chicken giblets. Does it still taste the same? Although the chef has changed, the taste should still be the same. Under the shopkeeper's hospitality, Zhang Xiaohua, who hadn't eaten meat for a long time, also ate 2 mouthfuls. As for the taste, please, it was all spicy. Back then, Zhang Xiaohua had drunk a few pots of tea. How could she taste it now? As for the other secret dishes, she only tasted them briefly. It was the same for Meng. After eating a little, she put down her chopsticks. She still wanted to hurry and find out about her origins. Dear customer? Is it not delicious? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua and Meng put down their food after a few mouthfuls, the shopkeeper was very surprised. Haha, it's nothing. It tastes the same as before. It's just that I'm not hungry or thirsty. I only came in because I saw an old friend. Oh, by the way, shopkeeper, is there a mountain god temple around Poyang town? Mountain god temple? The shopkeeper was stunned and said casually, No, there isn't. I've lived here for more than 20 years. I've never heard of any mountain god temple. How is that possible? Zhang Xiaohua said curiously. I've been there before. It's on a mountain outside the town. Oh, I see. The shopkeeper patted his forehead and said, Dear customer, you're talking about the small temple on Python Mountain, which is more than 10 miles west of the town. That small temple has been abandoned for a long time. As for whether it's a mountain god temple or not, I don't know. If you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have thought of this small temple. It's west of the town. Haha, that's great. As he spoke, Zhang Xiaohua reached into his bosom and took out a silver ingot. He smiled and said, The food is still the same as before. Not bad at all. The last time I came here, I only spent 50 copper coins. This time, no matter what, I cannot be stingy. When the shopkeeper saw the silver ingot, he quickly waved his hand and said, Dear customer, you don't have to be like this. I already said that it's 50% off. You only need to pay 1 silver ingot. 1 silver ingot? Or 50% off? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. When she was at Huanxi Manor, her monthly allowance was only 3 coins. However, now that she thought about it, perhaps her monthly allowance at Huanxi Manor would increase as well. Zhang Xiaohua didn't say much. She threw the silver ingot on the table and stood up to leave. The shopkeeper quickly stood up to send her off. When they reached the entrance of the restaurant, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the street not far away. She turned her head and asked, Oh right, I remember there's a ruffian in town called Brother Fan. I wonder if he's Brother Fan? The shopkeeper was surprised. You even remember this customer? However, that guy didn't have a good ending. 2 years ago, he blackmailed a young master. The young master's family came back to seek revenge. He was buried in the ground and skinned alive. Sigh, the heavens are fair. It's not that they don't want to take revenge, it's just that it's not time yet. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and leaped onto his horse. Together with Dream, they galloped towards Python Mountain, which was located in the west of the town. Poyang Town. Zhang Xiaohua met her Dream 5 years ago. She also met her second brother who was a bodyguard. Most importantly, she found a money pouch that could store items and a jade slip that could concoct elixirs. That day, Zhang Xiaohua vaguely suspected that Jing Xian came to Poyang Town for the jade slip and the money pouch. Now, he was even more certain that Shirtai came to Poyang Town after obtaining the immortal records of the incense cult. However, Shirtai didn't pass the test in the Refining Heart Cave or didn't obtain the inheritance of the incense cult. Therefore, she couldn't use her divine sense to find the cave under the mysterious restriction and returned empty-handed. Poyang Town was also the beginning of her dream story. How could Zhang Xiaohua not have a deep impression of it? Zhang Xiaohua and her dream arrived at the town within the time it took to eat a meal. Of course, it was not winter and everything in the fields had changed. Zhang Xiaohua came to Poyang Town from the mountain god temple by following the footprints of martial arts masters. Most of the footprints were in the fields. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't recognize whether it was the mountain he had been to before or not. When they got close, Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense. Seeing the mountain god temple on the mountain was still shabby, she said with a smile. Sure enough, it's here. In my impression, it was a mountain. Now it looks just like a big mound. It's really ugly compared with lingering Fragrance Peak. Where is the mountain god temple? Dream asked. You have to go up the mountain and go around several peaks to see it. Alas, 5 years ago, you were still a child. It's really not easy for you to come down from the mountain. Dream sighed and said, By the way, I remember that Master told you the way out when we left. How did you get so far away from the town? Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose and asked. When Shirtai took you away, how did you get out? Nonsense, of course. Dream was stunned when she said this. She laughed and said, I understand. Master took me there with Qinggong. How did you know Qinggong at that time? Then she said with a soft look, It's hard for you, Xiaohua. You actually came back to the town from the ferry with your own strength. Hee, that's right. I, Xiaoxia, have been outstanding since I was a child. Even the teacher of our Guozhuang house didn't dare to accept me for fear that he would lead me astray. Ha! Dream laughed and her gloominess disappeared. While they were talking, they went up the Python Mountain. After a while, they arrived at the mountain god temple. Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense and slowly found the direction according to her memory. She pointed to the place where the setting sun fell and said, "Dream, there is the place where we met for the first time." -4. Chapter 10:13. Yes, it was the first time. It was the place where they met for the first time. It was the place where Meng's love for Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohua's longing for Meng began. The two unfamiliar men and women suddenly met at that nameless ferry. That one chance meeting planted the seed that they had to rely on each other in their hearts. That seed was planted so deeply, and so discreetly. It was only when they met again 5 years later that the seed gradually sprouted. And once it sprouted, it was full of vitality. The yearning they had for each other during those 5 years was turned into fertilizer, allowing their feelings to multiply without restraint. At this time, perhaps it was not the harvest season, but snuggling in Zhang Xiaohua's arms and standing on the bridge that stretched into the river, Meng tilted her head and looked at the quietly flowing river. She couldn't help but whisper, "Xiaohua, what if my hook didn't hook you that day? You won't recognize me?" Zhang Xiaohua put her hand on Meng's shoulder and looked at the sunset. The orange light scattered on the running water, and she said with certainty, "No, Xiaohua." Meng was very emotional. She hugged Zhang Xiaohua's waist and raised her little face. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and lowered her head, kissing Meng's cherry lips deeply. They tasted the sweetness in each other's hearts. The cottage by the river was still the same. It seemed that very few people came here. Although Dream hadn't been here for many years, she still cleaned up the dusty cottage with great familiarity. Under the moonlight, Zhang Xiaohua and Dream sat where they had sat 5 years ago and chatted until the full moon came. The next morning, the two held hands and went on the road again. Zhang Xiaohua walked through the woods behind the cottage with Meng. The mysterious inhibition was still there. She saw the flaw clearly with her divine sense. Zhang Xiaohua knew that there was nothing inside, so he didn't stop. He used his qing gong and went straight to the west. The two of them walked for an hour, but they didn't see any signs of human habitation. They knew that people rarely came here. Using their divine sense, they also didn't find anything. Meng's eyebrows gradually furrowed. Her eyes kept looking around, trying to find the place she remembered. Suddenly, she saw a thick tree. The silver leaves made Meng's eyes light up. She immediately cried out, "Little Blossom, I remember it. This big tree, I have an impression of it. Master must have brought me here before, or I walked past it." Zhang Xiaohua perked up when he heard that. He asked, "Then, which direction did it come from? Do you still remember?" Meng looked for a long time and pointed in a direction. She hesitated and said, "Maybe it's this direction." "Okay, let's go and see," Zhang Xiaohua said happily. Zhang Xiaohua held Meng's hand and used her lightness skill to continue forward. However, the further they went, the more confused Meng became. Her face gradually turned pale. She looked like she was in pain. "Meng, what's wrong with you? Did you remember something?" Zhang Xiaohua saw this and held Meng's hand. She asked with concern, "I don't know why. The further we go, the more familiar the scene is. And the more I think about it, the more my head hurts." Meng gritted her teeth and said, "This?" Zhang Xiaohua stopped and said worriedly, Can you still walk?" "Yes, we must walk down this road today," Meng insisted. "This time, it seems that we are walking in front of others. But we can't let others ruin everything." "Well, that's fine. If you can't hold on because of the headache, let me know." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "Okay." Meng sighed and looked forward. "I don't know what secrets Mother has, or what secrets I have to hide. Someone actually erased it in advance. I think it's the Tenrya sect." Zhang Xiaohua said, "It seems that after we met the Tenrya sect's patrol team, many things happened. They must be the ones who did it. But I'm just the daughter of the sacred ambassador. How does this affect the Tenryus sect? How would I know? Maybe we've arrived. Zhang Xiaohua was laughing bitterly. Suddenly, she paused and a smile appeared on her face. What's wrong? Mengqi asked. Did you think of something? I didn't think of anything. It's just that, we've been in the mountains for so long. I think we've discovered something. That's bad. There are very few people here. Even beasts are rare. What could have happened? Why did you forget to walk this way? Haha, don't you see the stream here? If there are people living here, they must be near a water source. Let's follow the stream. Maybe we'll discover something? Ah? Xiaohua, you're amazing. You even know this? Amidst the praises of the dream, the two of them continued to walk forward for a long time. Suddenly, smoke rose from a valley in front of them. Xiaohua, quick! Look, there are people there. Really? Don't worry. Let's go and take a look first. The smoke might be from those hunters. Was there a need to say more? After turning around the valley, a small village appeared in front of them. Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to look around. There were only about 10 families. She then looked around the village. There were no fields. This village was really small and looked very poor. Every household did not have any walls. They only had mud brick houses and many of them were simple straw huts. It was almost noon. Some simple chimneys on the roof had begun to emit some smoke. In the small village, there were a few children of 3 or 4 years old playing happily. There were no adults watching over them. Is it here? Zhang Xiaohua looked back with concern. Meng's face was pale. Her brows were tightly knitted. Her small hands were cold and began to tremble slightly. She clenched her teeth and looked at the small village with a complicated expression in her eyes. At this moment, the children who were playing seemed to have noticed the strangers standing not far away. They all showed vigilance and curiosity. Then, they all rushed away. A little girl ran into the nearest straw hut. After a while, she held the hand of an old woman and walked out. As she walked, she was still talking and pointing in the direction of Zhang Xiaohua and Meng. The old woman came out. She shaded her eyes with her hand and looked over for a long time. She did not speak. Then, she waved her hand and signaled them to go over. Zhang Xiaohua saw that Meng was still at a loss for a while, and was surprised for a while. She said with concern, "Let's not think about it first. Go and ask the old woman. Maybe she knows something." Meng walked half a step forward. Then, she stopped and held Zhang Xiaohua's hand tightly. Zhang Xiaohua knew that Meng was a little timid. She patted her back and held her hand with her hand to show her encouragement. Then, Meng staggered forward. The old woman standing at the door held the little girl's hand. Her turbid eyes looked at Zhang Xiaohua and Meng, who were gradually approaching. When they got closer, the old woman blinked. There seemed to be surprise in her eyes. She raised her hand and pointed at Meng. She could not believe it and said, You. Are you Ye? Yes, you must be Ye. The old woman asked and answered her own question. You child. Where have you been these years? Why didn't you come back? Meng heard the old woman call her Ye. Her body suddenly stiffened. Then, as if she was struck by lightning, she trembled violently and murmured, Yes, I am Ye. Ye is me. While she was talking, a few younger middle-aged women came out from the other huts. When they saw Meng, they also exclaimed, Ye. You're still alive? Sai, where have you been? You've been gone for 4-5 years. When Granny Chiu passed away, she was still thinking about you. Yes, Granny Chiu never closed her eyes. She said that she had let down your mother by losing you. Sigh, you child. You're finally back. Go to Granny Chiu's grave and kowtow to her. Let her rest in peace. Who is this young man? Yeah, you. They all talked at once. Meng's expression kept changing. Then, she held her forehead and fainted in Zhang Xiaohua's arms. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. She hurriedly held Meng in her arms. She was a little flustered. Child, don't worry. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's panic, the old woman said kindly. Ya has always been like this. She'll be fine after a while. Granny Chio's hut hasn't been cleaned for many years. You should bring Ya to my house first. The other women also showed that they were used to this and came over to help. Zhang Xiaohua didn't need them. She easily carried Meng into the old woman's cottage. The cottage was not as small as it looked from the outside. It was actually divided into 3 rooms. The old woman pointed at the hut on the left and said, This is where I live. Put Ya on the straw. I think she'll wake up in less than an hour. Zhang Xiaohua entered the hut. It was indeed small. There was a thick layer of straw on the ground and some animal skins on the straw. Zhang Xiaohua put Meng on the animal skins and checked her meridians with her true qi. She also checked her pulse. After confirming that there was nothing serious, she walked to the hut in the middle. The hut was not big. It was very crowded when the women came in. Zhang Xiaohua bowed and said, Aunties, this is Granny. I'm Ren Xiaoyao. I'm Ya's junior brother. The granny frowned and said, Where has you been for the past few years? Well, Zhang Xiaohua hesitated. Meng fainted when she came to the village. She wasn't sure if she had anything to do with the village. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to tell anyone about Meng. The granny didn't say anything. The other women laughed and said, Young man, you was born here. She grew up here. We are very familiar with Lady Aya. Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. Is she Ya's mother? -4. Chapter 10:14. The women were surprised. Didn't you mention it to you? But then, they showed more sympathy. It seems that Ya's condition has worsened. Zhang Xiaohua frowned. Aunties, before Ya came here, everything was normal. It's just that she lost her memory and didn't know where she came from. She didn't faint like today. Although Zhang Xiaohua had studied medicine in Rejuvenation Valley, Meng was obviously a mental problem. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't even figure out Yan's relatively simple illness, let alone Meng's strange illness. Is that so? The old lady nodded slightly. From your expression, you should have recovered. I guess it's because she forgot everything here and suddenly found it today, so she couldn't accept it. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, That's what I think too. By the way, old lady, you also watched Meng. You grow up, right? How should I address you? Young man, just call me Lady Jiao. At this time, the little girl who pulled Lady Jiao out just now came over with a big black bowl. She handed it to Zhang Xiaohua and said, Brother, drink some water. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the little girl's cute appearance, and took the big bowl. He smiled and said, Little girl, how old are you? What's your name? Brother, my name is Nionio. I'm 5 years old this year. Nionio is so obedient. Zhang Xiaohua finished the water in the bowl in one gulp. The water was so sweet that it quenched his thirst very quickly. Young man, tell us, where has you been these years? What has she been doing? How did you know each other? By the way, you're her junior brother. Are you from Lady Aya's sect? Yeah, did you find her father? The women seemed to have never seen an outsider before, or perhaps they were concerned about Meng Qi. They kept asking questions, which made Zhang Xiaohua not know how to answer. She looked like a village woman in the Guizhuang house. Zhang Xiaohua smiled, touched her nose and said, Aunties, it's not that I don't want to say it, but it seems to be noon right now. Everyone's home. Before Zhang Xiaohua could finish, one of the village women came to her senses and said, Oh, I still have sweet potatoes on the fire. As she spoke, she hurriedly ran out. The other village women also remembered that they were cooking in their own homes. They were so curious that the food on the fire was going to. Oh no! In an instant, Granny Nine's cottage was empty. A smile appeared in Granny Nine's eyes. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her and said embarrassedly, Lady Jiao, please don't blame me. It's better for you to say these things. I'm too embarrassed to say it. Ha ha! Lady Jiao grinned, revealing her few remaining teeth. By the way, Lady Jiao, are you and Nyo the only ones at home? Zhang Xiaohua looked at the other room and asked. No, there's also Nyo's father. He went hunting with the other men in the village. He'll probably be back at night. Yes, I understand. No wonder there's no farmland around the village. It seems like the villagers rely on hunting for a living. Yes, this land is barren. They used to plant crops, but the harvest wasn't good, so they switched to hunting. After hunting for a long time, there's no prey nearby. They can only go to the depths of the forest to look for prey. That's why they leave at dawn every day and only come back at night. Sigh, it's really hard. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. It can't be helped. The laborers in the village don't know how to do anything except hunting. However, the people in the town like the game in the mountains. They can be exchanged for a lot of things in town. It's more suitable than farming. Oh, speaking of which, I have to thank Ya's mother. Eh? Why? Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. At this moment, Xiaohua's voice suddenly came from inside the house. Xiaohua, Xiaohua, save me, save me! Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate, and immediately rushed into the house like a ghost. Lady Jiao was old and dim-sighted. She accidentally lost sight of Zhang Xiaohua, which scared her. In the house, Meng sat up and looked around. She saw Zhang Xiaohua rushing in. She opened her arms and hugged Zhang Xiaohua. She buried her head deep in his chest. Zhang Xiaohua patted her back and said gently, I'm here. Don't worry, don't worry. Meng seemed to have a nightmare. The warmth of Zhang Xiaohua's body and the voice that made her feel at ease gradually drove away her fear. After a long time, Meng raised her head and asked, Is this my home? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, This is the village you lived in, but your home is still next door. Well, Xiaohua, my mind is in a mess. You must stay with me. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I can't ask for more. Meng Ran smiled sweetly. Her eyes were a bit more stable. Accompanied by Zhang Xiaohua, Meng came to the cottage. She bowed to Lady Jiao and said, Granny, I can't remember what happened here. Can you tell me more about it? Granny Jiao looked at Meng and kindly said, Of course you can. Actually, as long as you can wake up and not be as muddle-headed and unconscious as before, even if you forget everything that happened in the past, so what? Meng nodded and said, I thought so before, but I thought that my parents might be waiting for me here. I had to come back. That's why. I came all the way here. Granny, can you tell me about my parents and my past? Alas, your mother came here for the first time, and I was the one who brought her here. Even you could be considered as me helping you give birth. Your matters, how could I not know? Ah? Meng was surprised and said, Granny, why can't I remember anything? While they were talking, footsteps were heard outside the cottage. Zhang Xiaohua looked up. It was the few village women who had just gone out. They were all holding some food in their hands. Seeing that Meng had woken up, they were all happy. Yet you're finally awake? Come, you must be hungry. Eat something first. The village women all handed the food to Meng. The cottage was crowded again. Lady Jiao smiled and said, Let's go. It's too small here. Let's sit outside. After listening to Granny Jiao's instructions, a few of the village women quickly set up a few simple boards outside the house. They also took a few animal skins and placed them on the ground to serve as a table and chairs. Everyone sat on the animal skins. Meng could not refuse the village women's courtesy and ate a few mouthfuls. The rest of the food was given to the boys who came after hearing the noise. They each took a small bowl and chewed happily. Looking at Meng's expectant eyes, Lady Jiao smiled and said, Yet you were like this when you were young too. Then she pointed in the direction where Zhang Xiaohua and the others came from and said, I can't remember when it happened. Maybe 30 years ago. At that time, I was still out hunting with your father. In the wee hours of the morning, I was preparing to go hunting outside the village, but after walking for a while, I realized that I didn't bring any anesthetic. I had no choice but to return to the village. When I walked to the river, I saw a woman in white with her left arm covered in blood. She was your mother. Looking at her motionless appearance, she must have fainted. When I was young, I was also a big man with some strength, so I carried her back alone. That day, I didn't go out to hunt again. I helped your mother settle down. At that time, she was bleeding a lot. Moreover, there was a blood-red handprint on her waist. I didn't dare to act rashly. I just bandaged her up and waited for her to wake up or for the child's father to come back. Fortunately, she woke up before noon. Seeing that I was by her side, she asked me about the situation vigilantly. Then, she took out a few types of medicine and told me which ones to apply externally and which ones to take orally. I followed her instructions one by one. Later, your mother fell asleep again. She did not wake up until the head of the family came back. At that time, the cottage was still small. The head of the family went out to find a place to sleep. I stayed here to take care of your mother. After a few days, your mother's injury got better. The head of the family and several men in the village discussed and asked for your mother's opinion. Then, we built a simple cottage in the east of the village for your mother to live in temporarily. At that time, although the men in the village were strong and skilled in archery, they did not practice martial arts. After your mother recovered, she taught them some simple martial arts. On the one hand, it was for self-defense. On the other hand, it was for hunting more prey. Young man, just now, you said that you wanted to thank Ya's mother. If she did not teach us martial arts, I am afraid that our life would be more difficult now. What happened after that? Meng held her cheeks and listened carefully. After that, your mother lived in this village for a year and suddenly disappeared without leaving any message. Of course, at that time, we all knew that your mother was not a simple person, so we did not dare to ask her anything. After she left, we all thought that she went back to her previous sect and would never see her again. However, 2 years later, your mother came back again. This time, she did not come alone. She came with an older woman, Granny Chio, who took care of you later. Oh, when your mother came back again, her belly was slightly bulging. It seemed that she was 4 months pregnant. After your mother and Granny Chio came back, they lived in the cottage that she used to live in. However, after Granny Chio's renovation, the cottage was much bigger. It seemed that they planned to live there for a long time. Later, I secretly asked Granny Chio. She said that your mother was tired of the life outside and would live in this village in the future. After your mother came back to the village for the second time, she never went out again. Only Granny Chio went out a few times a year to buy things from outside. -4. Chapter 10-15. After a long time, the villagers gradually became familiar with your mother and Granny Chio. Your mother asked us to call her Lady Aya. We don't know her specific name, but your mother was very generous. Every time Granny Chio went out to buy things, she would give something to each family. We were all very grateful to her. Especially me, because I saved her life. I gave more things than others every time. You were born in the spring of the second year after your mother came. There weren't many outsiders in our small mountain village, and there weren't many people who had children. There was no midwife at all, so I volunteered to help you deliver. Let me think, you should be 18 years old this year. 18 years ago, it's gone in the blink of an eye. After Lady Gio finished lamenting, she continued. After giving birth to you, your mother's health had always been poor. She was often bedridden. At that time, I was very surprised. After giving birth to you, I didn't change much. Later on, my body became stronger. Your mother knew martial arts, so shouldn't she be better? Later on, I heard from your mother that because she was seriously injured last time, she couldn't be cured. After giving birth to you, her vitality was greatly damaged, and she couldn't recover. What's the old saying again? Misfortunes never come singly. Your mother's health was getting weaker and weaker, and you had problems. Since you were born, you looked fine for the first few years, but for some reason, from the age of 5, you were often muddle-headed. Sometimes you didn't even know who you were, and you didn't know your mother. You often got lost outside the village. We all advised your mother not to live here anymore. She should move back to the town or a bigger town, and let the doctors there treat your mother and you. However, your mother refused to agree no matter what. She only said that your illness was related to her injuries in the past. It was because her vitality was greatly damaged. She said that your meridians were damaged, which caused your congenital deficiency. When you grow up, you will slowly recover. Of course, we couldn't do anything about it. We could only pay more attention to you. Anyway, this village is small, and it's easy to take care of you. But when you were 7 years old— Lady Gio, not 7 years old, but 8 years old. I just came here that year. A village woman corrected her. Oh, then you were 8 years old. You fell ill and didn't know anyone. You even used a small bow and arrow to shoot people. Your mother was also seriously ill. Finally, she couldn't hold on and passed away. Then— My mother. Where is she buried? Meng asked sadly. Of course it's behind the village. Over there, it's on that mountain ridge. Granny Nine said as she pointed at a mountain ridge. When I'm done, let Nyo and the others accompany you. When Granny Chio was still alive, she often took you to pay respects. Alas, after your mother passed away, your illness worsened. You were like a different person. Granny Chio was told by your mother to take care of you wholeheartedly. But when you were awake, you were as obedient as a kitten. When you were confused, you would hit her. You were a child, so you didn't know. Although you weren't strong, it was still very painful. Granny Chio endured it. Alas, she took care of you until you were no different from when your mother was alive. Early in the morning, Granny Chio couldn't stand the cold and went back to put on a cotton-padded jacket. Lu Xuan was thinking of using a dustpan to catch the sparrow, so he forgot about you. When Granny Chio came back with a cotton-padded jacket, you were gone. We followed the tracks you left in the snow to the stream, but we couldn't find your footprints. At that time, Granny Chio ran down the mountain along the stream like a crazy person. We followed her everywhere, but we couldn't find any trace of you. We didn't know where you went. We went back to the village, but Granny Chio didn't come back. We searched for 4 days and 4 nights without sleeping, but we still couldn't find any trace of you. We even went to the town in the east, but we couldn't find you. After we came back, Granny Chio fell ill and couldn't recover. Within half a year, she died. Meng was already in tears. She cried and said, Lady Gio, I didn't know about this. When I woke up, I was already with my master. And it was already 5 years ago. It was at the ferry at the foot of the mountain in the distance. I even saw my junior brother. You. Why didn't you find that place? Silly girl, we almost searched the entire mountain. Why didn't we find that ferry? That cottage was built by us before. But when we went there was no one there at all. Meng, don't think so much. Lady Gio is talking about what happened when you were 9 years old, and you are talking about what happened when you were 13. There are 4 or 5 years in between. Maybe you went somewhere else first, and then you were rescued by the Shirtai. Don't forget, Lady Gio said that you were delirious at that time, but when I met you, you were very clear-headed. In these 4 or 5 years, maybe something happened to you, and then you were taken to the ferry by the Shirtai. Meng finally stopped crying and nodded slightly. You're right. Fate makes fools of people. Things are often like this. Seeing Meng sad, the village women next to her wiped their tears. After a while, Meng stood up and said, Lady Gio, I want to pay my respects to my mother and Granny Chio. Yes, you should go. Your mother should pay her respects, and Granny Chio should pay her respects even more. She was still talking about you when she died. Meng's eyes turned red again. Under the guidance of Nyo and some other children, Zhang Xiaohua and Meng came to the mountain ridge behind the village. There were more than 10 graves on the mountain ridge. In the southernmost area, there were 2 inconspicuous ones. There were 2 wooden signs in front of them. One of the words could not be seen clearly, and the other one was also blurred. However, one could still vaguely see that it was Grandma Chio. Nyo said in a childish voice, These 2 are Lady Aya and Granny Chio. Every year when we came to pay our respects, Grandma would always talk about them. I remember them very clearly. Hearing Nyo-Nyo's words, Meng's tears couldn't help but fall like a broken string of pearls. Meng quickly walked to her mother's grave and knelt down. She cowed out 9 times and murmured, "Mother, I'm back. Forgive me for being unfilial. I didn't know that Mother was buried here. I couldn't come to pay my respects to Mother." Seeing the lush grass on the grave, Zhang Xiaohua sighed. She walked over and pulled up the grass one by one. Then, she asked Nyo-Nyo to bring a shovel from the village to add new soil on the grave. Then, Meng cleaned up Granny Chio's grave. After Meng finished paying her respects, she scratched her head. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what to do. She couldn't kneel down and kowtow, could she? So, she asked tentatively, Meng, Meng heard Zhang Xiaohua calling her with tears in her eyes. She looked at her lover standing next to her, bit her lips, and said, "Thank you, Xiaohua. Mother and Granny Chio will be very happy if they know that you helped them repair their graves." Then, she looked down at the 2 inconspicuous graves and murmured, "Your son wants to be filial, but you are not here. Mother, your daughter, has grown up now. My illness should be cured, but you are not here. You've left and taken away all of my memories. Even if I wanted to miss you, I couldn't. Are you worried about your daughter?" Meng's shoulders shook again, and she cried softly. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her, and did not know how to comfort her. After thinking for a while, she found a place to sit down. The children around her played for a while, and found it boring. They all clamored to return to the village. Beside the desolate little graveyard, there was only the beautiful Meng, who was filled with endless melancholy. There was also Zhang Xiaohua, who wanted to comfort her but was powerless to do so. The afternoon passed quickly. Lady Jiao and the other village women knew how Meng felt, so they didn't disturb her. They waited for the sky to turn dark, and several people came back from the other side of the village. They had bows and arrows on their backs, crude spears and padao in their hands, and some game on their shoulders. These people came from the mountain ridge. They saw people on the graves from afar, so they quickened their steps. When they saw Meng, an older man shouted in surprise, "Yeah, you are back?" Then, he shouted behind him, "Sikong, Granny Chiozya is back." "Ah, Xiao." "Yeah." As he shouted, an old man jogged over from behind. "It's really ya. You are back. You don't know Granny Chio. Sigh, I complained so much. She only spoke to me when she was about to leave." Meng didn't know what to do when she saw Sikong's sincere smile and concerned tone. She looked at Zhang Xiaohua for help. She didn't have the spirit she had when she killed the bad guys on Dragon Mountain. Zhang Xiaohua quickly stepped forward and cupped her hands. "Sikong, I am Ren Xiaoyao Meng Ye's junior. Ye has lost all her memories. She doesn't recognize Sikong, or the other uncles and aunties in the village." I know. Sikong nodded kindly. "You used to be like this too. I haven't seen her for a few years. She seems normal now. She will be fine in the future." "Yes, Sikong. She just doesn't remember the past. Everything else is fine." "Eh? That's great. Which miracle doctor cured her? This old man needs to thank him properly." Meng wasn't used to Sikong's unusual care for her. She said embarrassedly, "Sikong, are you close to me?" When a man beside her heard this, he smiled and said, "Little Ya, fourth master isn't very familiar with you, but he's very familiar with Granny Chio." Sikong's weathered face was a little embarrassed. He waved his hand and said, "All right, it's good that you are back. Yeah, go back to the village. It's windy here. Don't get sick again. Otherwise, Granny Chio will blame me again." Meng's eyes reddened again. She nodded and said, "Yes, Sikong." Zhang Xiaohua and Meng returned to the small village with a few men who came back from hunting. Sikong pointed to a large wooden house in the north of the village and said, "Yeah, this is where you lived with your mother and Granny Chio. Do you remember?" -4. Chapter 10:16. It was a very ordinary wooden house. It looked even more dilapidated than Zhang Xiaohua's Guizhuang house. At this moment, the lights in the wooden house were already lit up. The village women must have known that Meng was going to stay in the village tonight. "We're back!" a man yelled at the top of his lungs, startling a few birds on a nearby tree. In an instant, the previously quiet village immediately became lively. First, a few children ran out from the small houses, shouting, "Daddy!" as they scrambled to be the first to pounce on the men. When they arrived in front of the children, the men threw their weapons and prey on the ground. Then, they hugged their children and raised them up high. Then, they put their unshaven faces close to the children's faces, causing the children to giggle crazily. A few village women also came over at this time and took the weapons and prey that the man had thrown down. They stood beside their men and children and looked at them with smiles. From time to time, they would stretch out their hands and knock away the grass, leaves, branches, and other things on the men's bodies. Then, these men and children slowly walked back to the village and returned to their own houses. Meng and Zhang Xiaohua walked at the back. Looking at the happy family, their hearts were filled with tenderness. At the same time, they also felt a slight pain. Although the pain was different, they secretly held each other's hands. Zhang Xiaohua whispered in Meng's ear, "These, we will have them, okay." Meng replied in an even lower voice. Her face was slightly red. Although Zhang Xiaohua's last sentence disappointed her, it was sweet to hear it. "My parents are also waiting for me at home. My brother and sister-in-law's children have grown up. If you go back with me, you will be as happy as them. Yeah, you go back to your house first. I will go back and pack up. You haven't been back for a long time. The uncles and aunts in the village will welcome you." After Sikong finished speaking, he smiled and took the things to the house not far away. Zhang Xiaohua and Meng waited in front of the wooden house. They saw Lady Jiao coming out. She smiled when she saw them. "I was about to ask the children to call you. Coincidentally, we met Sikong." "Yes, where did Sigong and the rest go hunting? Who knows where they went? They came back early today. I think they had a good harvest." "Yeah, and Xiaoyao, you guys go in first. The other aunts and I have already tidied up the house. I will go back to see Nyo's father and make some delicious food." Meng waved her hand and said, "Lady Jiao, don't bother. I don't have any appetite. Alas, child, the dead cannot be brought back to life. You have to live well so that your mother and Grandma Chiao can rest in peace in the underworld. Oh right, I made your favorite rabbit meat soup. You should drink a few more bowls later." After saying that, Lady Jiao left in a hurry. Looking at Lady Jiao's back, Meng murmured, "They are so good to me." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Yes, they watched you grow up. They treat you like their own child. Of course, they like you from the bottom of their hearts. But they have their own lives. I am not their family after all." Zhang Xiaohua held Meng's hand and said, "They are not, but I am." "Yes, I know." Meng bit her lip and pulled Zhang Xiaohua into the wooden house. The wooden house was very simple. In the middle was a room like a hall. There was a large low wooden table with a few low stools beside it. There was a tea set on the table, which didn't look expensive. There were also some common furnishings in the village. It was similar to the central room of the Guizhuang house. There were 2 wooden walls on both sides of the central room, which separated 2 rooms. Meng hesitated for a moment, and walked into the room on the right. Zhang Xiaohua brought a candle to accompany her. This was obviously a woman's boudoir. As soon as they entered, they saw a dressing table with a dusty bronze mirror on it. Next to the mirror was a small box. Next to the dressing table was a maroon wooden cabinet. It wasn't locked. Next to the wooden wall was a rough wooden bed. At this time, there was nothing on the wooden bed, only a bare wooden board. Meng walked to the dressing table and raised her hand to wipe off the dust on the bronze mirror. Then she looked at her face with the candle in Zhang Xiaohua's hand. She was in a daze. It seemed that under the candle, in the bronze mirror, she saw the scene of her mother putting yellow flowers on the mirror more than 10 years ago. After a long while, Meng sighed and raised her hand to open the small box. There were many compartments in the box, but those compartments were already empty. When Meng was about to close the box, her eyes focused. She saw something in a small compartment on the lid. When she reached out and took it out, it was a wooden hairpin. The hairpin was very rough and there were no patterns. It was similar to a chopstick. Meng carefully rubbed it a few times and held it in her hand. Looking up at the wooden cabinet, Meng opened it again. As expected, it was empty. Meng looked at it carefully, and then reluctantly put it down. Looking at the empty room, Meng came to the room on the left again. The room on the left was obviously bigger than the one on the right. There were 2 wooden beds, one small and one big. This room was even emptier than the previous one. Except for the wooden bed, there was nothing else. However, Meng still walked over and sat on the small bed. She closed her eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. At this time, footsteps came again. Zhang Xiaohua looked back and saw Xikong. At this time, Xikong had changed into a new set of clothes. His face looked a little energetic. Xikong entered the wooden house. Following Zhang Xiaohua's light, he saw Meng sitting on the bed and said with a smile, "That's the bed you've been sleeping on since you were a child. I helped Granny Chiu make it. Granny Chiu lives here, so it's convenient for her to take care of you at night." Then he looked around the room and said, "Before your mother left, she left half of her things to you and Granny Chiu. She gave the other half to the villagers. She hoped that the villagers would treat you well. Later you were lost. Before Granny Chiu left, she gave the things in this room to the villagers. You know, the villagers are very kind, but they are also very poor. It's okay. Xikong, uncle and aunt live a very hard life. They also took care of me when I was a child. These things should be given to them. I just want to see the things my mother used when she was alive." Xikong's eyes fell on the wooden hairpin in Meng's hand and said, "This hairpin belongs to your mother. She didn't give it to anyone. Even Granny Chiu left it behind when she passed away. I don't know why, but I think she wanted to give it to you." "Oh, that's good. Xikong, I don't want anything. I just want this hairpin." Meng nodded. "By the way, will you live here in the future?" Xikong suddenly asked. Meng shook her head. "No, although you are very kind to me and treat me as your family, but I can't remember you at all. Meng was a little sad. Xikong sighed. "It's good that you don't live here. You're still young and have a long life ahead of you. Although life here is simple, it's also hard. It doesn't suit you, maybe in the future. When you want to come back, you can come back. I'll let the others keep this wooden house for you." Meng shook her head. "No, Xikong, life in the village is very difficult. I see that Lady Jiu lives in straw huts. If it's possible, let's let them live in this wooden house. Sai, your mother was very kind to the villagers. No one is willing to live in this wooden house. It's just a memento. 1 year, 10 years, or 40 years can all be mementos. What about 50 years, 60 years? Xikong, mementos are in the heart. This wooden house is empty anyway. It's better to let everyone live in it." Okay. I'll tell Lady Jiu later. By the way, Xikong, I don't want to leave my mother, but she's buried here. I'll miss her." Xikong thought for a moment, then said, "Yeah, you're still young. Maybe you don't think so much. Your mother must be someone with a story outside. Why did she come to this isolated place while pregnant with you and live here for decades? Didn't she like the peace and quiet here? After she died, she told us to bury her on the mountain ridge. She didn't say anything else. Didn't she want to breathe the free air here after she died? I think you should respect your mother's wishes and not touch her grave. Let her rest here peacefully. If you miss her, you can come and visit. Anyway, you already know how to get here." Xikong is right. I didn't think it through," Meng said after thinking for a moment. "Also, fourth elder brother, my mother, did she say anything about what happened to her outside?" Xikong shook his head. No, we just guessed that your mother was very powerful outside because she taught us martial arts moves. Then, did my mother say anything about my father? Meng's voice trembled when she asked this question. Her eyes flashed with hope. However, Sikong still shook his head. Your mother never mentioned it when she was alive. And I also asked Granny Chio. At that time, she wanted to send you to your father because of your serious illness. But Granny Chio didn't know anything about it. Sigh. Meng sighed and didn't know what to say. Young man. Sigong turned to Zhang Xiaohua and said, Xia is the child of our entire village. You must treat her well in the future. If the old man knows that you don't treat her well, even if I have to risk my life, I will settle the score with you. Before Zhang Xiaohua said anything, Meng's face turned red. Zhang Xiaohua held the candle and said with a smile, Sikong, don't worry. Ye is my senior sister. Her martial arts are better than mine. She will bully me in the future. How can I bully her? You should worry more about my miserable life. Zhang Xiaohua. Meng's face turned red. She forgot to call Zhang Xiaohua Ren Xiaoyao. -4. Chapter 10:17. Sikong saw that Zhang Xiaohua and Dream were so close, and his eyes unconsciously showed a kind smile. Not long after, Granny Nine returned with a large pot of white meat soup in her hands. Even from afar, Zhang Xiaohua could smell the fragrance of the soup. Although Zhang Xiaohua had long since abstained from eating, he still couldn't help but move his fingers. The people in the small village were very enthusiastic. Although Dream didn't know any names, they all called her Ye. They cooked the game they hunted during the day and brought it to Dream's wooden table. Although Dream had eaten countless delicacies in Xuanxian cult, she was still touched by their friendship. She felt that the things in this mountain village were her favorite. This wooden house had been dark for several years. Tonight, the candlelight swayed and the sound of laughter was endless. However, when the people dispersed, Dream also rested in the house. Zhang Xiaohua sat alone in the hall, listening to the silence of the village. She also released her spiritual sense to look at the quiet village. She felt a little strange in her heart. However, Zhang Xiaohua vaguely felt that it was strange, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Is it because that mysterious person didn't come, so I'm being paranoid? Zhang Xiaohua could only think with self-mockery. The next morning, before Zhang Xiaohua woke up, the men in the village packed up their weapons and went on the road early. The village women sent the men away and went back to sleep. When the first ray of sunlight shone in the wooden house, Zhang Xiaohua, who was sitting cross-legged, opened her eyes. She was very keen to find that Dream, who always woke up late, was standing in front of the window of the wooden house. The window was facing the graveyard on the ridge. You're awake? Dream asked. Her voice was a little strange. Zhang Xiaohua stood up and said, Dream, did you sleep well last night? Well, it was okay. When Zhang Xiaohua went to the window, in the sky, she saw that Dream's eyes were a little red. She couldn't help but sigh. You didn't sleep last night, right? Well, how could I sleep? Let's go to Mother's grave and take a look. Zhang Xiaohua accompanied Meng to the tombs again. Meng bent down and kowtowed a few times in front of the two tombs. She looked up at the sun that had jumped out of the horizon in the east and smiled. A new day has come again. Yes, it was. We couldn't find it yesterday. Zhang Xiaohua also raised his head. The warm sunlight shone on the faint flames in his eyes. Since we couldn't find him yesterday, then, why bother looking for him? With that, Meng took Zhang Xiaohua's hand and walked away along the mountain ridge. Aren't you going to say goodbye to Lady Jiao and the others? Zhang Xiaohua asked carefully. There's no need. To be honest, although they treat me very well, and I know that I grew up here, but I don't have them in my heart. Looking at how much they spoil me, I feel a little ashamed. If we were to face the separation head-on, perhaps they would be a little sad. However, I only had my attachment to my mother. It could not help but be said to be a kind of embarrassment. Since that's the case, it's better to leave without saying goodbye. You've grown up, Meng. Zhang Xiaohua held her hand and smiled. By the way, I forgot that your name is Ye. Do you think I should call you Ye or Meng? What do you think? Meng smiled. I think you should be called Meng Ye. Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment and said, One is the name I gave you, and the other is the name your mother gave you. Isn't it just right to put them together? Bah, you're dreaming. Meng Qian smiled and said, How can you put the name my mother gave me together with the name you casually gave me? If yesterday doesn't reappear, then what's the point of saying yesterday's name again? Just keep the name Ye in your heart, and engrave it in your memory. Oh, by the way, I left in a hurry just now and forgot to leave some money for Lady Jiao and the others. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized. Oh, by the time you think about it, the cucumber will be cold. Meng snappily rolled her eyes at him and said, I put all the money I had on the table and left some commonly used pills. Well, that's great. When I first arrived at Mo Cho's city, I also exchanged some money. It's enough for us to go all the way back to Huanxiang cult. Meng was surprised and asked curiously, What did you exchange for? Pills? Pills? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Those things are used as money in Huanxiang cult, but outside it's a life-saving thing. Why would I exchange it for pills? It's just some gold leaves that Nye Qian you gave me. I went to the bank and exchanged them for money. Hee, I thought you would steal it, Meng said with a smile. No, how can I have such a character in your eyes? Zhang Xiaohua also rolled her eyes at Meng Qian. You think? After speaking, Meng Yao released Zhang Xiaohua's hand and activated his internal energy. Using his qigong, Meng Yao flew away. His silhouette in the forest that had just woken up in the morning was incomparably. Meng Qian's light laughter was like the sound of a bird crying for the first time. 10 days later, Zhang Xiaohua was riding on the David's deer on a rather secluded official road. Meng was riding on a big white horse. Both of them had a smile on their faces. They didn't talk much and only turned their heads occasionally. They looked at each other with a smile in their eyes. There was a kind of tacit understanding between them. It was as if their hearts were connected. But after a while, Meng Qian looked at the scenery beside her and unconsciously said, Xiaohua, what kind of road are you leading us on? This doesn't seem like a road we've been on before. Zhang Xiaohua mysteriously said, Of course not. We went to Yixia town and Poyang town. We didn't have enough time, so I found a shortcut. Then she proudly said, You can follow me. I guarantee that you will be able to see the light in front of your eyes. You will have the feeling of at the end of the road. Really? I don't dare to believe it. Meng pursed her lips and said, You don't know how many times you got lost along the way. How dare you boast today? A scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. How long have we been out? I am a brand new me. Ha! Meng Qian laughed and pointed at Zhang Xiaohua. Aren't you still a pair of small eyes and a flat nose? Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose and felt a little wronged. When she was about to speak, she suddenly frowned slightly. After a while, a strange expression appeared on her face. She patted her bald head and slowed down. When Meng Qian walked side by side with her, she said with a smile, Meng, I have something to tell you. What? Meng Qian said. Why are you so mysterious? Then she blushed and said vigilantly, You don't think too much. Zhang Xiaohua blushed and said, I really didn't think too much. While they were talking, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from behind. The official road was straight, so they could see very far at a glance. When Zhang Xiaohua and Meng looked back, they saw dozens of horses chasing from a distance. Oh no, what's wrong? Meng Qian was shocked. The official road was very remote. They had been walking for a long time and had not met anyone. Now that someone was chasing after them, they were in trouble. Zhang Xihua's eyes were sharp. She saw that the person in front was Liang Xiangxiu who ambushed Peacock. And the person behind him was one of the people who set up the tripartite formation. Oh no! Zhang Xiahua shouted. Meng, something bad is going to happen. Meng Qian panicked. What's wrong? You know all these people? Which sect are they from? How dare they go against the fragrant sect? Zhang Xiaohua nodded. Yes, do you remember when Peacock was returning to the fragrant sect from Rejuvenation Valley? She was ambushed. Yes, I do. You, are these people? Yes, I followed Peacock back to the fragrant sect. So I've seen them before. The first one is the one. Then, why don't we run? I'm afraid that won't work. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and said, even though we can't be sure that these people are coming for us, we still need to be prepared. How about this? You don't need to be afraid. We are the emissaries of the fragrant sect. In the future, the fragrant sect will go out into the world. If we don't go back, not only will the hierarch be angry, even the Daolan Temple will be angry. They won't be able to bear the consequences. But Meng Qian was at a loss. What are you afraid of? Meng Qian, don't forget. Besides the fragrant sect and the Daolan Temple, you have the Tenryas sect as your backing. Tell me, how dare they? Meng Qian nodded. Her mother was the sacred ambassador of the Tenryas sect. There was no doubt about it. Even the great master Cham Gung could see some clues. How could the leader of this mysterious sect not see it? Then, what do you mean? Meng Qian looked at the approaching crowd and felt a surge of courage. It's nothing. They're just here to capture us or cause us trouble. I have an idea. Since the two of us aren't a match for them, why don't we go with them and see which sect this mysterious force is from? What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua said in a relaxed manner. I thought it was a good idea. It's a bad idea. Meng Qian said helplessly. It's okay, Meng. I promise you that you'll be fine. Besides, if you don't want to play with them, we'll leave immediately. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua said, patting her chest. Leave? That's easy for you to say. My Qinggong isn't as good as Senior Kong's. If she can't run, how can I? Meng Qian said disdainfully. No, it's not that Peacock can't run. She can't run. Zhang Xiaohua explained. Rejuvenation Valley's caravan, cough, cough. Don't say any more. They're already in front of us. Meng Qian glared at her. The two of them rode to the side of the official road. The one in front was Liang Tsengshu. He held a long knife in his hand. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua and Meng Qian hiding on the side of the official road, he couldn't help but smile. He whispered to the disciple next to him. Sect leader is really good. He knows that this pair of man and woman are inexperienced. That's why he ordered us to capture them. Look, they still think they're on a scenic tour. Brother Liang is right. However, these two are still young. We have more than enough manpower. Asking Brother Liang to do this is like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Knife? Liang Tsengshu waved the knife slightly. There was a sound of the knife. He then said seriously, the cult of incense is not to be underestimated. 2 years ago, we went to Rejuvenation Valley to kill Peacock. Although we arranged it well, didn't we still return in defeat? -4. Chapter 10:18. Liang Tsengshu led everyone to catch up with Zhang Xiaohua. With a wave of his hand, he surrounded Zhang Xiaohua and Dream. Zhang Xiaohua looked at them coldly. When everyone stood still, she cupped her hands and said, I am the disciple of the incense cult who sent the message to the Daolan Temple. May I know what business you have with me? Liang Tsengshu rode forward and cupped his hands. I am Liang Tsengshu from between the clouds and the water. Greetings to the disciple of the incense cult. Ah? Between the clouds and the water? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and blurted out. Is it a sect? Between the clouds and the water? Liang Tsengshu smiled. Yes, our sect is called Between the Clouds and the Water. We have not made a name for ourselves in Jianghu yet. We have embarrassed Ren Xiaoxiao. Brother Liang, since you know that my surname is Ren and I am the disciple of the incense cult, it seems that you have come prepared. What business do you have with me? Liang Tsengshu nodded and said, I'm looking for young hero Rin and Miss Zi Xia. Of course I have something to discuss with you, but it's not convenient to talk here. Can you follow me to the other sect? Eh? Where is between the clouds and the water? Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. Ren Xiaoxia is really muddle-headed. Between the clouds and the water has not made a name for itself in Jianghu yet. Of course, this place cannot be told to him. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. Then it will be difficult. I have to rush back to the incense cult to report to the cult leader. It is not up to Ren Xiaoxia to decide whether to go or not. Don't you think so, Miss Xixia? Meng looked at him coldly and said, I'll listen to junior brother Ren. Zhang Xiaohua said proudly. See? Before he could finish his sentence, the saber in Liang Tsengxiu's hand trembled slightly and hummed continuously. A disciple next to him said angrily, You brat, brother Liang is giving you face and advising you nicely. If you refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, then don't blame us for being ruthless. Noisy! Zhang Xiaohua scolded. I'm talking to your brother Liang. When did you open your mouth? As soon as the word, Open your mouth, was said, Zhang Xiaohua's figure floated up from the David's deer and used the ethereal steps to get closer. The disciple only saw a flash and a figure appeared in front of him. Without waiting for the disciple to make a move, a voice angrily said, You dare! Unfortunately, as soon as the word dare was said, a light pa sound was heard. The disciple felt a burning sensation on his face and a pain in his mouth. Just as he was about to spit out blood, a saber light flashed in front of him again. However, when the blade reached the disciple's eyes, it stopped. This was because Zhang Xiaohua was already laughing. He turned around and flew back to the back of the David's deer. Ha ha ha, I dare! Zhang Xiaohua threw this sentence in front of the saber light. When Zhang Xiaohua sat on the David's deer's back, the disciple spat out a mouthful of blood and 2 teeth. You! The disciple placed his hand on the saber at his waist, but in the end, he was unable to pull it out. Liang Tsengxiu's relaxed expression was now serious. He took the saber back from the disciple's eyes and stared at Zhang Xiaohua, saying, Ren Xiaoxia is actually good at Qinggong. Along the way, he hid it and didn't reveal it. This is really unexpected for Liang. Then he coldly said, What's the reason for Ren Xiaoxia's move? Making a move in front of Liang, does he think that Liang is blind? There's no reason. It's just that Ren doesn't like other people telling him what to do. If Ren wants to do something, even if you stop him, Ren will still do it. If Ren doesn't want to do it, even if you beg him, Ren won't do it. Moreover, Ren is just a disciple of the fragrant religion. Mo Xingdong's senior sisters are all better than me in Qinggong. There's no need to be so proud. Ren Xiaoxia is young and full of vigor. The martial arts of your sect's inner disciples, Ren Xiaoxia doesn't need to show off. Liang naturally knows, but even if Ren Xiaoxia's Qinggong is good, but are you sure he can escape from my hands? Liang Tsengxiu stared at Zhang Xiaohua, his saber still in his hand. Running is not running is running. What's the difference between running and not running? Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. Liang Tsengxiu was stunned, and then he clapped his hands. You really came back from the Daolin Temple. You actually learned the catchphrase of the Daolin Temple. Unfortunately, you're not Master Changxing, nor the great Master Changgang, nor the Changxing Abbot. So, even if you're good at talking, you can't escape today. I won't run. Brother Liang, I have a few questions. If you can answer truthfully, I'll persuade my senior sister to go with you. What do you think? What questions? Liang Tsengxiu said vigilantly. If it involves the secrets of my sect, forgive me, Liang, for not being able to answer. Haha, then listen first. Okay, Ren Xiaoxia, please speak. Brother Liang? Another disciple next to him whispered. Why are you being so polite with him? Just take him. We have so many brothers, what's there to be afraid of? Liang Tsengxiu frowned and glared at him. I have my own ideas. Brother Liang, your junior brother, doesn't seem to understand your painstaking efforts. It's not strange at all. Even a wise man can make mistakes. My disciple just wants to do his best for the leader, but he forgot that you're the envoy of the cult of fragrance, and you're on a diplomatic mission to the Dalan Temple. If we take you away, won't between the clouds and the water offend the cult of fragrance and the Dalan Temple before we even enter Jianghu? Will we be able to live a peaceful life in the future? It's better to invite Ren Xiaoxia and Miss Xixia to between the clouds and the water as guests. It'll be easy to come and easy to send. It'll be good for everyone. Respect, respect. Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands. Brother Liang, with your level, you should be sent to the cult of fragrance as awakening jellyfish. Awakening jellyfish? Liang Zhengxu frowned slightly, then smiled. Ren Xiaoxia, is this the first question? Zhang Xiaohua shrugged. If you think so, then so be it. Well, since Ren Xiaoxia said it clearly, then Liang will tell you the truth. Awakening jellyfish was sent to your sect by between the clouds and the water. It's just that there hasn't been any news of awakening jellyfish for a long time. Moreover, Ren Xiaoxia also knows about it. I'm afraid that he's most likely dead, right? Well, it's impolite to keep in touch. I'll also answer Brother Liang's question. I only found out about it from the mouths of your sect's other spies. As for who it is, whether it's dead or alive, I really don't know. However, before I left the valley, something big happened in the sect. In a fit of anger, the sect leader captured all the spies from the various sections. I'm afraid that Lord Awakening Jellyfish is among them. Oh, so that's how it is. Liang Zhengxu nodded. Is the master the sect leader of Between the Clouds and the Water? Zhang Xiaohua asked again. Yes, that's right. There's no need to hide this. Ren Xiaoxia came from the cult of fragrance and appeared in Macho City. I'm sure he also knows about the incident in Rejuvenation Valley. Sai, you are really something. You even know that Ren and senior sister went to Macho City? I don't deserve such praise. Ren Xiaoxia and Miss Xixia went to the Dalan Temple without anyone knowing. That's what I call amazing. The people of Jianghu were all kept in the dark by you. If it weren't for the disciples of the other sects, Liang wouldn't have known that these two unremarkable disciples were actually the emissaries of the cult of fragrance. Zhang Xiaohua chuckled. I'm afraid it was your sect's spies in the Dalan Temple who told you. Haha, is this the third question? Of course not. Zhang Xiaohua rolled his eyes. Do you think I'm the one asking such an idiotic question? Anyone with a brain can think of the answer. She then looked at Meng and asked in a low voice. Did you guys do the shirtai? Shirtai? Liang Zhengxu was stunned and immediately shook his head like a rattle drum. Is Ren Xiaoxia joking? Ren Xiaoxia knows the martial arts of the shirtai better than I do. If I want to send someone from between the clouds and the water, what kind of person should I send? How did this person sneak into the cult of fragrance? Ren Xiaoxia. Haha, you can think of it with your brain. Why bother asking? Zhang Xiaohua pursed her lips and laughed. I'm just casually asking for confirmation. You don't have to be so sarcastic, do you? Then what other questions does Ren Xiaoxia have? Liang Zhengxu seemed to be tirelessly teaching. Nothing. Let's wait for Ren to think of it, and ask him then. Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head. Wait. Meng stopped them. I have a question. Miss Xixia, please ask. Who is the sacred ambassador of the Tenria sect? Sacred ambassador? Liang Zhengxu was stunned and shook his head. This question. Forget it. Since you asked, Liang should answer. Liang has never heard of the sacred ambassador of the Tenria sect. Ah? Zhang Xiaohua and Dream looked at each other, their eyes full of surprise. However, Liang has heard that the Tenria sect has a mysterious saintess. This saintess has a noble status in the sect. She is second only to one person and above everyone else. Other than the sect leader, Sakura, everyone has to be respectful to her and listen to her every word. Of course, this is only what Liang has heard. This Tenria sect saintess has always been mysterious. Not to mention outsiders, even in the Tenria sect, very few people have seen her true face except for the demigods and semi-devils. And? Meng asked again. Is Grand Elder Jinggang? Grand Elder Jinggang? Liang Tsengshu was stunned and asked curiously, "What about Grand Elder Jing Gang?" "Forget it. Just pretend I didn't say anything." Meng shook her head. Liang Tsengshu fell into deep thought. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Meng. Meng nodded slightly, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "Also, is there an old man wearing a bronze mask between the clouds and the water? He calls himself a Banner Lord or something." "Banner Lord?" Liang Tsengshu said without hesitation. "Between the clouds and the water doesn't have a Banner Lord. This old man isn't from between the clouds and the water." Then he said impatiently, "All right, Liang has already answered your questions. Will the two of you follow Liang?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "A gentleman keeps his word. Since I said it, I won't go back on my words." "Good. Straightforward." Liang Tsengshu didn't expect the matter to be resolved so smoothly. He laughed and said, "I hope the two of you don't mind if I seal your acupoints." -4. Chapter 10:19. "Nonsense, of course I mind," Zhang Xiaohua said. "Do you think we're fools? If you hit our acupoints, won't we be at your mercy? That's not very good. Liang can't let you know where between the clouds and the water is." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "That's your problem. Anyway, we can't let you hit our acupoints." Forget it. Since Ren Xiaoxia doesn't agree to hit our acupoints, then we won't hit them." Liang Tsengshu smiled and said, "Then what should we do?" Zhang Xiaohua had an ominous feeling. "You'll know when the time comes." Liang Tsengshu also smiled and didn't answer. The three of them chatted for a long time, and it was as if they were friends who hadn't seen each other for a long time. No matter how you looked at it, they didn't look like they were hostile to each other. Then, Zhang Xiaohua and Dream followed beside Liang Tsengshu, and Liang Tsengshu walked in the middle of the Aqua Cloud disciples. They found another official road and headed southeast. After a few days, Liang Tsengshu got a carriage from somewhere and took out 2 pieces of black cloth. He said apologetically, "And Xiaoxia, Miss Xixia, if you go any further, you'll reach between the clouds and the water. For safety reasons, please get off your horses and use these 2 pieces of black cloth to cover your eyes. My disciples between the clouds and the water will lead the carriage and send you to between the clouds and the water as guests." Out of Liang Tsengshu's expectation, Zhang Xiaohua agreed very readily. She obediently got on the carriage and covered her eyes with the black cloth again. She said, "Brother Liang, what do you think?" Of course, this is good." "Well, if this is the case, if between the clouds and the water is found out in the future, you can't say that you have something to do with Ren." Hearing Zhang Xiaohua's mockery, Liang Tsengshu turned a deaf ear. He waited for the two to cover their eyes and said, "Between the clouds and the water hasn't appeared in Jianghu yet, so naturally, we have to keep it a secret. But when between the clouds and the water becomes famous in Jianghu, I'll invite Ren Xiaoxia to be my guest between the clouds and the water." Sure. As long as there's good wine and good food, call me at any time." Zhang Xiaohua released her divine sense and spoke casually. Zhang Xiaohua and Meng got on the carriage, and Liang Tsengshu sat in front of the carriage to accompany them. The carriage continued to move forward. The carriage traveled for another 3 days and nights. Zhang Xiaohua also used her divine sense to observe for 3 days. But as she watched, Zhang Xiaohua almost laughed out loud. Except for the first day, when the carriage went in a straight line, the rest of the days were curved. Even though Zhang Xiaohua was a road idiot, she naturally knew the same scenery after seeing so many times. Zhang Xiaohua didn't speak. She sat quietly in the carriage and only looked outside occasionally. Most of the time, she was comprehending the way of heaven and comprehending the new dragon and tiger talisman. As for the heaven-reaching staff technique, she had already memorized it in her mind. She was just waiting for a suitable weapon to practice it properly. Meng Yi sat close to Zhang Xiaohua in the carriage. A few days ago, when she found out about her background, she was both sad and happy. Later, under Zhang Xiaohua's guidance, she gradually figured it out. Now, according to Zhang Xiaohua's arrangement, they were going to the nest between the clouds and the water to have a look. She took advantage of these few days of peace to think about the future and straighten out her thoughts. Therefore, in the carriage, there was silence. The three of them didn't speak anymore. On the fourth day, the carriage no longer curved and sped forward. After traveling for half a day, they came to the front of a continuous mountain range. The carriage didn't stop and picked a random path to get closer. When they reached the front of the mountain, the carriage couldn't move forward. Liang Tsengshu jumped down from the carriage and called out, "Ren Xiaoxia, Miss Xixia, you can get down now!" Zhang Xiaohua and Meng Yi groped their way down and asked, "Have we arrived at between the clouds and the water?" "Haha, not yet. But it's close at hand. The carriage can't go on the road below. I'm sorry you two have to ride horses." "Haha, no problem." The two of them then rode on their respective horses and David's deer, following the rugged mountain path. After 4 hours, they turned around a tall mountain. A gust of cold air blew against their faces, and a large pool appeared in front of them. The pool was dark green in color, and at the intersection of the several pools, there was a mist that covered a huge island. "Well, you two can take off the black cloth," Liang Tsengshu said with a smile. Zhang Xiaohua and Meng Yi took off the black cloth. When they saw the scene in front of them, their eyes showed a surprised expression. This is your sect? Between the clouds and the water?" Zhang Xiaohua said in surprise. I was thinking along the way why your sect had such a strange name. Now it seems that the sect is just like its name." "Yes, Ren Xiaoxia is right. Between the clouds and the water is above the blue water and under the white clouds. Water and clouds are the state of the sect's prosperity." Looking at Liang Tsengshu's complacent expression, Zhang Xiaohua almost blurted out, "Does your sect leader tell you this every day?" Meng Yi looked at it for a while and asked curiously, "Senior brother, Liang, your sect's water island is a foreign land. Looking at your sect's image, it should be the realm of immortality. But why have I never heard of your sect's name?" Liang Tsengshu clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Our sect has experienced a drastic change in the past. Many of our disciples have perished. Our sect leader Darren has been enduring hardships to achieve what we have today. Perhaps many people in your sect resent our sect's private methods, but who knows how difficult it is for our sect to survive." Zhang Xiaohua sighed. "How can we not be hurt when we're in Jianghu? We only practice the art of escape." Then she looked a little embarrassed, but she couldn't finish her sentence. "Ha!" Liang Tsengshu laughed and said, "You let others take the hit for you." Pfft. Meng Yi covered her mouth and laughed. Zhang Xiaohua also cupped his hands and said with a hint of admiration in his heart, "Senior brother Liang is very talented. This little brother admires you. Junior brother Ren is joking. Liang invited you here. I hope you won't blame him in the future." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. "Didn't I say that if we don't want to come, we won't come no matter how you invite us? Brother Liang invited us to see the wonderful view between the clouds above the water. I can't thank you enough." "Okay." Liang Tsengshu appeared very open and candid. He raised his hand and said, "Ren Xiaoxia, Miss Xixia, please. Our sect leader has been waiting for you for a long time." Everyone went down the mountain and walked to the edge of the pool. There was already a big boat docked on the shore. Zhang Xiaohua was worrying about how to get the Great Wisdom Sword on the boat when Liang Tsengshu said, "Please don't blame us. You can leave the horses on the shore." Zhang Xiaohua nodded. "We'll follow Brother Liang's arrangement." The two of them boarded the boat. The big boat moved slowly. When they got closer, the giant island between the clouds and the water gradually revealed its true appearance. The island was like a big mountain standing between the pools. The mountain was densely covered with pine and bamboo and strange rocks. At a glance, they couldn't see any path up the mountain. About 10 feet above the water, there was a thick fog that shrouded the mountain. Everything couldn't be seen clearly. Even when the big boat arrived in front of the island and looked up, the thick fog still couldn't be seen. It was as if it was attached to the island. "Brother Liang, this fog is quite strange. It's different from normal?" Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but ask. "You're really a disciple of a famous sect?" Liang Sangshu almost gave her a thumbs up. He said proudly, "This is our sect's method of immortality. It's the foundation of protecting between the clouds and the water." Meng snorted and said in a low voice, "It's just SOSO. Compared to my fragrant sect's protective formation, the peak protection formation, it's still a bit weaker. Miss Xixia is right, but your sect's formation, hee hee." Meng rolled her eyes at him and didn't argue with him anymore. When the big boat got closer, it stopped moving forward. Instead, it waited for the disciple who was controlling the boat to walk to the bow of the boat. Then, he raised 2 scarlet triangular flags and waved them left and right. No one knew what the flags meant. After half a cup of tea's worth of time, the big boat moved on its own and slowly drifted along the water island. When one looked carefully at the water below the boat, one could see that the water was divided into different parts. Some were moving forward, some were moving backward, and some were moving straight toward the water island. Only Zhang Shihua's boat seemed to be on a fixed course. It went in one direction and kept moving forward. When Zhang Xiaohua arrived, she hid her divine sense and true energy. She didn't release her divine sense and couldn't see the abnormality of the water flow. However, Zhang Xiaohua still praised, "Brother Liang, this entrance method is quite similar to my sect's formation." Liang Tsunxiu's face was filled with curiosity as he asked, "How does one enter your sect?" Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua thought of Chang Chang and the magical bead he buried beside Jinghai Lake. She smiled bitterly and said, "Your sect has been searching for a long time. Until now, you still haven't found the secret of our sect?" Liang Tsunxiu smiled faintly and said, "Who says we haven't? Liang just wants to hear Junior Brother Ren's opinion." "Don't!" Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "I won't embarrass myself." As they were talking, the big boat tilted and shook violently as if it was about to flip over. Then, it rushed toward the moss-stained stone wall of the island. "Ouch!" Meng couldn't help but cry out. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked too. However, when she saw Liang Tsunxiu's calm expression and the disciple at the front of the boat using the 1,000-kilogram drop to stabilize himself, she immediately understood. She reached out her left hand and held Meng's small hand. Meng held Zhang Xiaohua's hand and felt at ease. At this moment, the big boat was about to crash into the stone wall. However, the strange thing was that there was no sound at all. It was as if the stone wall did not exist. The big boat sank into the wall. After that, everyone's eyes lit up. An extremely wide waterway appeared in front of them. On both sides of the waterway, there were a few rows of short peach trees. At this moment, the peach blossoms were in full bloom. Wherever the breeze passed, countless petals would drift and fall on the water surface of the waterway. It was a poetic and picturesque scene. Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and said, "What a good place to go. Your sect leader seems to be a cultured person. Junior Brother Rin is right. Our sect leader has great talent and bold vision. She is indeed rare in this world. All the traps and arrays between the clouds and the water were set up by her. She is truly admirable." -4. Chapter 1020. The boat traveled for several li, but it still didn't reach the shore. At this time, it was the disciple who steered the boat. The 2 sides of the waterway had become cliffs and precipices. On the cliffs, the cries of apes and cranes rose and fell one after another. The precipices were also lush and verdant, with many green things hidden in the clouds. Zhang Xiaohua looked at it and felt quite strange. She pointed at the green on the precipice and said, "Brother Liang, what kind of medicinal herbs are these? This humble one has never seen such a thing before." Liang Tsunxiu glanced at it and said with a smile, "Junior Brother Ren has misjudged. Those aren't medicinal herbs, but tea trees." "Tea trees?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She asked curiously, "Are those green leaves tea leaves? Why are they different from what I usually see?" "Naturally, they are different," Liang Tsunxiu said. "Junior Brother Ren has seen that they have been processed. These are grown on tea trees, so of course they are different." "Haha, I understand," Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. Reading 10,000 books is really not as good as traveling 1,000 li. If I didn't come to your sect, how would I know that tea leaves would be like this? While chatting and laughing, the big boat went against the current and entered a small pool. When it docked on the shore, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but sigh. There is an island in the water, and there is water on the island. The Tao of immortality is really magical. On the shore, an old man with white hair and beard was waiting with several disciples. After jumping ashore, Liang Tsengshu introduced. "And Xiaoxia, this is Li Su of Huiming Hall, Lili." Lili smiled, his mouth wide open. He cupped his hands and said, "On behalf of Bai Zhangmen, I welcome Ms. Xixia, Ren Xiaoyao, and Ren Xiaoxia from the incense cult." Although Zhang Xiaohua and Meng were forced to come here, they saw that Liang Tsengshu did not make things difficult for them along the way. This Huiming Hall's Li Su was also polite to Li. Although they were puzzled, they also went forward to greet him. They bowed and said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Li, for welcoming us. Miss Xixia and Ren Xiaoxia are too courteous." Li smiled. "Both of you are the messengers of the incense cult. Of course, you represent the incense cult. How could I, between the clouds and the water, not treat you with respect?" We don't dare," Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. "Bai Zhangmen of the incense cult still has important matters to attend to. For the time being, I will have to inconvenience you too. This way, please. I have already arranged a place for you too. Please take a rest. This way, Ren Xiaoxia, Miss Xixia. Liang will take his leave first." Liang Tsengshu cupped his hands and said goodbye, then left without saying a word. Zhang Xiaohua and Meng were led by Li to an abode. In the abode, several beautiful maids had already brewed fragrant tea and picked some rare fruits, waiting for the guests. After the guests and the host landed, Li raised his teacup and said, "Ren Xiaoxia, Miss Xixia, please try our cloud mist tea. This is a specialty of our incense cult. You can't taste it anywhere else." Zhang Xiaohua and Meng both picked up their teacups and took a sip, praising it endlessly. Meng was fine with it. She only felt that this mouthful of refreshing tea made her mouth salivate and had endless flavors. Zhang Xiaohua was even more different. She only felt that when the tea entered her stomach, a wisp of qi of heaven and earth was naturally born. She only needed to slightly circulate her qi to refine it into her body. She knew that this tea was indeed precious. Zhang Xiaohua had also drunk tea with qi of heaven and earth in the Guizhuang house. That tea only had an ordinary taste. Although the qi of heaven and earth was comparable to this tea, the taste was worlds apart. "Good tea!" Zhang Xiaohua put down her teacup and praised. "Ren can be considered to have drunk countless good teas, but I think this is the first time he has drunk this kind of celestial tea." Li was overjoyed and said, "Ren Xiaoxia can actually taste 3 of its flavors?" Sect leader Bai is also a tea lover. He often says that this is a celestial tea. Although this old man can taste the differences, I can't tell why. Please enlighten me, Ren Xiaoxia. Zhang Xiaohua blushed slightly, and said with a smile, "Old Hall Master is thinking too much. I just feel that this tea is indeed a little different from the tea of Chuanshan cult, but I don't know what the difference is. Let me tell you something, but I have disappointed Li." Li was indeed disappointed, but he still said, "Since Ren Xiaoxia likes it, then please wait a moment. This cloud mist tea is also precious in between the clouds and the water. This old man will go and see if the sect leader is free. At the same time, I will also ask for some tea for Ren Xiaoxia." Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed, and cupped her hands and said, "Thank you very much." After Li left, Zhang Xiaohua also asked the others in the house to leave. Meng rebuked, "When did you drink tea on Lingering Fragrance Peak? Why didn't I know? Why are you talking nonsense? Don't you care about your face?" Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "Mother and father at home both like to drink tea, but they drink despicable tea. Now that they see a rare tea, how can they not ask for some? Bring it back for father and mother to taste? For this, why would I care about my face?" Meng was a little disappointed. "Sai, you can give up your face to find something fresh for mother. Even if I want to give it up, who can I give it to?" Hee. Zhang Xiaohua patted Meng's shoulder and said, "Don't you still have my father and mother? If you have to give it up, then give it up." Meng's face flushed red, and she spat. "They are your father and mother. What does it have to do with me?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled, but did not continue to harp on this. She said, "That may not be so. Although your mother is no longer alive, your father can still be found. From Liang Xingshu's words, your mother should be the holy maiden of the Tenria sect. Such a noble role, how bad can your father be? Perhaps he is a famous person in Jianghu?" But what?" Meng Qi asked. "However, looking at your mother's appearance, she ran to a remote village to hide. There's an 80 to 90% chance that she's hiding from the Heavenly Dragon sect. That father of yours that you haven't met, I'm afraid he's not someone from the Heavenly Dragon sect." Sigh, "Yes, I think so too. But my father is still my father. No matter what, I have to know who he is." Meng was melancholy. She then looked outside and frowned. "Xiaohua, I have been thinking along the way. Why is Liang Xingshu so polite and insisted that we come between the clouds and the water? If it was my decision, even Yu Sui would not agree. I listened to your idea and followed you here. How confident are you that you can escape from here? Why do we have to escape?" Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously. "Although I don't quite understand the intentions of that Bai Zhang men between the clouds and the water, just looking at Liang Xingshu and Li Su here, they do not seem to have any ill intentions. Perhaps that Bai Zhang men has something to ask us personally? I have a feeling that things are not so simple. Didn't you ask Liang Xingshu a few questions earlier? You also told me on the way here. They have been working hard in Jianghu for so many years and have always maintained a mysterious appearance. Why are they being so polite to us? Don't forget that great elder Jing Gang was killed by them. They have been at odds with our fragrant cult for so many years. It would be easy for them to kill us now. You don't have to worry about this. Since this Xiaoxia dared to bring you here, I naturally have 100% confidence. If I had a 99% confidence, why would I be willing to let you take the risk? Let's not talk about other things, just you. Can't you talk about something else? Why do you always talk about my appearance? Isn't it just because my mother is the sacred ambassador of the Tenria sect? As for whether or not she is the sacred lady, I don't know if she will give face." Meng was a little annoyed by Zhang Xiaohua's weak explanation. Zhang Xiaohua knew that Meng was a little upset. She was brought to a strange place by between the clouds and the water and walked blindfolded for a long time. He couldn't help but feel a little apologetic. He held Meng's hand and chatted with her. Meng's expression gradually eased. After the time it took to eat a meal, the old hallmaster returned with 2 jade bottles in his hand. He had a smile on his face. He entered the door and said, "I am really sorry for making you two wait." Then he handed over the jade bottles and said, "This is between the clouds and the water's specialty, cloud mist tea. Please keep it well." Zhang Xiaohua took the bottles and opened the cork. A light and elegant fragrance rushed into his nose. His whole head felt refreshed. He used his divine sense to scan the jade bottles and found that there was a rich vitality in them. Zhang Xiaohua kept one bottle for herself and handed the other to Meng. Meng looked at him and said, "You keep it for me." After Zhang Xiaohua put it away, Li said with a smile, "Bai Zhang men of the Bai sect invited Ren Xiaoxia to the White Cloud Hall for a chat." "Me?" Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, "Why aren't there 2 people?" The old hallmaster said, "This is the sect leader's order." "I don't know." "I see." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and nodded. She said, "Please lead the way for me, Mr. Li." Then he turned his head and said, "Senior Sister Zixia, please wait here. I will be back soon." "Okay, you, be careful," Meng replied with concern. Zhang Xiaohua followed Li Su to a simple and unadorned hall. At this time, there were more than 10 people sitting on both sides of the hall. There were men and women, fat and thin. Liang Xingshu sat on the right side, slightly above. The 3 people who set up the 3 talents formation were also next to him, sitting below. Young Master Pingyu was also among them. When Pingyu saw Zhang Xiaohua, his face changed greatly. When he returned to between the clouds and the water, he only told her about the immortal Dao people in Mo Chou's city. How could he tell her about him and Huang Chang? Although he knew that there were disciples of the fragrant religion in Jianghu, they were all male disciples of the Rui Jin Palace. Sometimes he faintly felt that Meng's words were somewhat credible, but he had always been secretly denying himself. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua, he knew that the unremarkable young man and woman were telling the truth. They were really disciples of the fragrant religion. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the people in the hall, and her eyes fell on the beautiful woman who was nearing 40 years old. She saw that the beautiful woman's black hair was like clouds, her eyebrows were like black, her nose was high, and her face was sparkling like jade. She had a dignified face. Huh! Zhang Xiaohua just looked at the beautiful woman when a divine sense swept over her body. It went back and forth a few times. People of the immortal Tao? Zhang Xiaohua frowned slightly and thought to herself. What Liang Zhengshu said before, I thought it was an exaggeration. The immortal Tao in this world, other than the fragrant religion, the Daoan temple, and the Tenrya sect, even the Misty School, the so-called inheritance of a large sect, does not have any experts of the immortal Tao. And the Righteous Alliance may not have any immortal Tao people. Between the clouds and the water, how could there be an immortal Tao cultivator? -4. Chapter 1021. Reporting to Sect Master, Fragrant Religion Disciple Ren Xiaoyao is here. After Li reported, he sat on a chair on the left. Ren Xiaoyao from Fragrant Religion greets by Zhang Men. Zhang Xiaohua bowed. And please rise. A gentle force appeared in front of Zhang Xiaohua and lifted her up. Thank you, Bai Zhang Men. Zhang Xiaohua said, then turned to look at Ping Yiyu and cupped her hands. So Brother Ping is a disciple of Between the Clouds and the Water. I'm sorry for my rudeness. When Ping Yiyu heard this, his originally gloomy face became even redder. He stole a glance at his sect master and cupped his hands. So Ren Xiaoxia is really a disciple of Fragrant Religion. I'm sorry for my rudeness. Night Rain, you know Ren Xiaoxia? Bai Zhangmen asked with a little surprise. This? Ping Yiyu only hesitated for a moment, then immediately told him about his encounter with Zhang Xiaohua in Dream. Then he asked Zhang Xiaohua. I don't know. Young Master Huang of the Falling Star Alliance, humph. Zhang Xiaohua snorted. Young Master Peng, what do you think will happen to him? Peng Yiyu. Bai Zhangmen sneered. This sect master asked you to go to the Falling Star Alliance to inquire about Fragrant Religion, you and Huang Chang. Let's not talk about it, but Ren Xiaoxiao already told you that they are disciples of Fragrant Religion. Why didn't you say anything when you came back? Sect master, please don't blame me, disciple. Disciple just thought that they were just talking nonsense. How can a disciple of Fragrant Religion really say that they are disciples of Fragrant Religion? They just wanted to scare us away, who would have thought? Hee hee. Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, We are gentlemen, of course we are magnanimous. Peng Yiyu, go to the law enforcement hall to receive your punishment. Bai Zhangmen ordered without any explanation. When Peng Yiyu walked out of the main hall with an ashen face, Zhang Xiaohua was elated. This bastard actually dared to have ideas about my dreams. Letting you receive your punishment is really a gift from this Xiaoxia. Ren Xiaoxia, please take a seat, Bai Zhangmen said with a smile. A disciple brought a chair over. Zhang Xiaohua sat down and said with a smile, Bai Zhangmen is too courteous. I wonder why Bai Zhangmen invited me and Senior Marshal's sister Between the Clouds and the Water? Bai Zhangmen laughed and said, Of course there is a reason. Otherwise, there would be no need to mobilize so many people. Hee hee, Bai Zhangmen has eyes everywhere. There are few people in Jianghu who don't know about you. You even know about my affairs clearly. Why would you still need me? Ren Xiaoxia praises you too much. Many things are not necessarily seen with one's eyes. If I didn't hear it with my own ears, I wouldn't be at ease. All right, Bai Zhangmen, please enlighten me. I have to hurry back to the incense cult. At this time I'm running out of time. Martial arts convention? Bai Zhangmen asked with interest. Sigh, since Bai Zhangmen already knows. Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to finish, Bai Zhangmen asked. When will the incense cult's martial arts convention be held? Zhang Xiaohua rolled her eyes and said, All the major sects have received the invitation. Your cult has eyes and ears in all the sections. Don't tell me you don't know. Is it the 26th of this month? That's right, Zhang Xiaohua replied snappily. Well, there's still more than half a month. If Ren Xiaoxia returns in time, he can also make it in time to report. Bai Zhangmen laughed. That depends on whether Bai Zhangmen will let me return in time, Zhang Xiaohua said. Why not let you return in time? This sect master has never thought of keeping you alive. Thank you, Bai Zhangmen. Oh, there's no need. In fact, I invited you here this time to ask how you came out of the incense cult. It seems that there's still some time before your sect-protecting formation opens. Bai Zhangmen really doesn't know. Of course, I really don't know. Otherwise, I wouldn't have sent so many people and used so many methods to inquire about the secret passage of the incense cult. Sigh, why does Bai Zhangmen have to hide so much? I don't believe that Bai Zhangmen has no news. Zhang Xiaohua said somewhat evasively. If not, how could this sect leader invite you all here? Forget it, then I'll get straight to the point. Ren Xiaoxia, is there a problem with your sect-protecting formation? Yes, it is. Sure enough, if there were no flaws in the sect-protecting formation, how could so many disciples come out? How could all the sects go to Lingxiang Peak? Bai Zhangmen's face showed a strange expression. Since the incense cult is about to reappear in Jianghu, then what about us between the clouds and the water? How can we be willing to fall behind others? Then he seemed to explain to Zhang Xiaohua. Between the clouds and the water originally planned to summon the martial arts world next month and prepare to reappear in Jianghu. I didn't expect that the incense cult would send out a hero's invitation first. It's quite difficult for our sect. If we send out a hero's invitation after your cult, we'll inevitably be laughed at. Rather than that, it's better to take advantage of the Martial Arts Society Assembly to explain our sect's situation to the world's heroes. Good things come in pairs. Ren Xiaoxia, what do you think? Very good, very good. Bai Zhangmen invited me here so that I can pass this message to the cult leader of the other cult, right? Bai Zhangmen clapped his hands and said, Exactly. If the other cult suddenly sends a disciple forward, it'll inevitably be rude and make Nun Jingyi unhappy. It's better to let Ren Xiaoxia pass the message to show our sincerity. Well said, I'll definitely do as you say. In that case, thank you very much, Ren Xiaoxia. Bai Zhangmen suddenly asked. Your cult's protective array is gone? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She thought for a moment and said, This matter is considered a secret now, but when Bai Zhangmen arrives at Dianqi Lake, he'll naturally know. It's not a big deal to tell him now. Well, it's no wonder that the disciples of the incense cult can enter Jianghu at will. Alas, with the appearance of the incense cult, Jianghu is in chaos. The protection of the celestial way has always had a limit. After thousands of years, the incense cult has finally fallen into the mortal world. Zhang Xihua's heart skipped a beat. She asked. Listening to Bai Zhangmen's tone, he's quite emotional. Could it be that there's also a story between the clouds and the water? Ren Xiaoxia, do you want to know? If it's possible, please enlighten me. Then, if Ren Xiaoxia tells me why you didn't directly return to the incense cult after coming out of the Dalan Temple, but instead went to Xia Town, Baiquan Mountain, and Poyang Town, and even disappeared for a few days, then I'll tell you the truth. Alas, Bai Zhangmen is really amazing. I've always been careful, but I've still been targeted by your cult. It's just that this matter can't be told to outsiders. Bai Zhangmen, please understand. Is that so? I heard that the great master Chang Gung of the Dalan Temple gave Ren Xiaoxia a note. What's on it? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. Is it some kind of agreement between the incense cult and the Dalan Temple? Is it something related to the celestial way? Maybe it's something, That the incense cult left in Jianghu? The more Zhang Xiaohua listened, the more she felt that Bai Zhangmen was too imaginative. She shook her head. Bai Zhangmen finally slapped the chair and stood up. Ren Xiaoxia, don't hide it. The whole family of Yixia Town and the Qing family of Baiquan Mountain are inextricably linked to the Celestial Way. Even Puyang Town, in my impression, is related to the Celestial Way. When Ren Xiaoxia went to those places, he immediately killed and destroyed the bodies. If it's not some secret of the Celestial Way, how can I believe it? Zhang Xiaohua also stood up. She cupped her hands and said, Bai Zhangmen, what I said is the truth. Some of these are my personal affairs, so it's not convenient for me to tell you the truth. But one thing I can be sure of is that it has nothing to do with the Celestial Way that Honored Sir mentioned. If Honored Sir doesn't believe me, you can go and investigate. Honored Sir asked us to come here just to let us pass a message to the cult leader. I've already agreed. Sect leader, please go back to Lingering Fragrance Peak as soon as possible. Hee. Sect leader Bai sneered and said, Young hero Ren, you've always been sensible. Why are you so muddle-headed now? What? Zhang Xiaohua glared at her. If Ren doesn't say it, Bai Zhangmen won't listen? Compared to the secret of the Celestial Way, what's so important about you passing a message? Ren Xiaoxia should seriously think about it. There's no need to think about it. Zhang Xiaohua interrupted Bai Zhangmen and said, This matter has nothing to do with the Celestial Way. You're really not going to say it? Bai Zhangmen didn't believe her at all. What? Zhang Xiaohua sneered. Bai Zhangmen, do you still want to interrogate me? Ha! Bai Zhangmen laughed. A small disciple of the fragrant fragrance cult is so rampant. If this sect leader doesn't use some tricks, won't he be looked down upon by the other disciples? As he spoke, Bai Zhangmen's left hand lit up. It was the teapot that he usually held in his hand. His right hand had already formed a seal. With a pa sound, his fingers slapped on the teapot. With a soft poof sound, the round teapot lid flew up, circled in the air, and suddenly enlarged. Bai Zhangmen pointed his finger, and the dustpan-like lid flew towards Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry at all. She reached into her chest and was about to take out Xu Meng when suddenly a warm current flashed from her forehead. Her body was fixed to the ground, and she couldn't move at all. Then, the thing that Wan Wuxin left in Zhang Xiaohua's Naiwen Palace in the ruins of Huan flew out from Zhang Xiaohua's forehead and supported the flying lid. The lid immediately turned back to its original form. With a spin, it flew back to Bai Zhangmen's hand. At this time, the thing that flew out from Zhang Xiaohua's forehead also spun in the air. In a moment, it expanded again and turned into a primordial spirit projection, standing in the air. Wasn't that Wan Wuxin? Seeing such an unforeseen event, everyone in the hall between the clouds and the water was stunned. Bai Zhangmen was first stunned, then shocked. Finally, he stared at Wan Wuxin's primordial spirit projection with an incredulous expression. Are you a disciple of the Shenao sect? Where did you get the demon refining gourd in your hand? Wan Wuxin asked faintly. Junior is indeed a disciple of the Shenao sect, Bai Yanqiu. Seeing this, Bai Zhangmen didn't dare to be negligent. He immediately knelt on the ground and said respectfully, This demon refining gourd was passed down by this disciple's master. -4. Chapter 1022. Well, the Lianyao flask was not refined properly, and your cultivation of the Shindao sect's mantra is not up to par. Why is the Lianyao flask controlled by a disciple with a weak cultivation like you? This? Bai Yanqiu was speechless. Is there anyone else here? Ask them to leave. No one is allowed to come within 500 feet, or else I will kill them all. Wan Wuxin said expressionlessly. This is the friend I brought here. He needs to stay. Yes. Bai Yanqiu replied, and then said to the crowd, All of you leave. No one is allowed to come within 1,000 feet of this hall, or else you will be killed. Everyone understood that the matter was confidential, and immediately left. Zhang Xiaohua, who was next to him, looked bitter. Looking at the situation, Wan Wuxing was going to tell them what he told her in the ruins of Huanqiu. This matter was unusual, and the fewer people who knew about it, the better. Now that her body was fixed by Wan Wuxing, and she could not move, she had to listen even if she did not want to. Sure enough, Wan Wuxing said, as the disciple who controls the treasure of the Shindao sect, you must be a disciple with a high status in the sect. Do you know who I am? Bai Yanqiu said respectfully. I have seen the portrait of the founder of the Shindao sect in the secret chamber, so I naturally know who you are. Well, it's good that you know I. However, your cultivation is so weak, I think the Shindao sect has declined. Yes, good master, you know that our Shindao sect has been destroyed by the incense cult, the Misty School, the Dalan Temple, and other sects thousands of years ago. The remaining disciples of the Shindao sect have never dared to show up in Jianghu, and only carefully passed down the orthodoxy of the Shindao sect. Since a few hundred years ago, a genius disciple appeared in the sect and found the remains of the Immortal Tao, and carried forward the orthodoxy of the Shindao sect. However, in order to hide it and not forget the old shame, the Shindao sect has changed to between the clouds and the water. I am not talented, but I have been taught by my master, and now I am in charge of between the clouds and the water, and have been promoted to be the head of the between the clouds and the water. Wan Wuxing turned a deaf ear to her words and nodded. There is no sect in the world that has not declined for thousands of years. Even in the cultivation world, the replacement of sects is like the stars in the sky, and the sun rises and the moon falls. As long as the orthodoxy is still there, even if it has declined, it does not matter, that's right. Since there is a primordial spirit projection, between the clouds and the water will naturally restore the name of the Shindao sect. Under the leadership of the Grand Master, we will unify Jianghu and revitalize the Immortal Tao. Bai Yanqiu's face flushed red, and she was obviously very excited. However, although Wan Wuxing could not hear her, he seemed to have seen through her thoughts. He smiled and said, Silly child, it is better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish. I have left all the orthodoxy in the Shindao sect, so how can I help you again? Moreover, I am only a primordial spirit projection, which is not even a primordial spirit. Other than being able to speak, I can only judge the situation based on some mana. What are you talking about? Whether you are a man or a woman, I don't even know. How can I help you? Ah? Bai Yanqiu almost covered her mouth in surprise. Her face was full of disappointment, but there was also a trace of relief in her eyes. Okay, I won't say any more. I have limited mana. It is already very rare for you to bring me here and meet the descendants of the Shindao sect. The Taoist who brought I here is not a disciple of a big sect. He seems to be from an unorthodox small sect. You all take a good look at him. I have already promised him that I will leave some benefits for him. Later, give him a copy of the jade slip that I left behind. Then, Wan Wuxing cupped his hands towards Zhang Xiaohua and said, Taoist, thank you for bringing I to the Shindao sect. It must have been a bumpy journey. Thank you for your hard work. I have already told my disciples that I will give you some things in a while. In addition, if what I said happens in your lifetime, my disciples will definitely reward you handsomely. In addition, I have some important things to tell my disciples in private. I hope you can understand. With that, she waved her hand. Zhang Xiaohua felt that there was no movement around Wan Wuxing and Bai Yanqiu. Their mouths were moving, and even their hands were sometimes pointing to other places, but she couldn't hear a single word. Mute restriction. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized. She wanted to shrug her shoulders, but unfortunately, her whole body was restrained by Wan Wuxing. Even her shoulders couldn't express her feelings. In this way, Zhang Xiaohua stood in the main hall for more than an hour like a clay statue. Within the restriction, Wan Wuxing's primordial spirit projection gradually dimmed and finally turned into specks of brilliance. Like fireflies scattering in all directions, they finally turned into dust and disappeared between heaven and earth. The mute restriction also dissipated. However, just as Zhang Xiaohua felt the restriction loosening and was about to move, Bai Yanqiu, who was still frowning and thinking hard, suddenly moved. It was the Immortal Way's levitation technique. He came directly in front of Zhang Xiaohua. Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to react, Bai Yanqiu's two fingers pointed at Zhang Xiaohua's major acupoints. Zhang Xiaohua understood, and unconsciously her face changed. Bai Yanqiu's series of acupoints sealed her whole body's power. Moreover, the technique used to seal her acupoints was Immortal Way technique. Bewitching finger? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned, but immediately understood that this was not some bewitching finger, but another Immortal Way technique in martial arts. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's face change, Bai Yanqiu let out a long sigh. Without explaining anything, he turned back to sit on the chair and looked around the main hall in a daze. He seemed to be digesting Wan Wuxing's appearance and the shocking news that Wan Wuxing brought. The entire main hall was dead silent. Except for Zhang Xiaohua and Bai Yanqiu, no one would have thought that just a moment ago, the founder of the Immortal Way, the founder of the Shenao sect, had appeared here. Bai Zhangmen. Zhang Xiaohua waited for a moment, and made up her mind. She asked, angrily, "What's the matter with you? Just now, didn't you say that as long as I answered some questions and brought the matter of your sect's visit to my sect leader, you would let me go back to the fragrant way? What? Are you going back on your words?" Bai Yanqiu was pulled back from his contemplation by Zhang Xiaohua. Hearing Zhang Xiaohua's question, he smiled faintly and asked softly, "Ren Xiaoxia, please don't blame me. What my founder said I'm sure you know. This is a great opportunity for the revival of the Immortal Way. If my Shenao sect, no, between the clouds and the water can seize this opportunity, wouldn't we be able to suppress the Tenria sect and become the #1 Immortal Way sect? We can also wash away the shame of my Shenao sect's previous extermination. For such an important matter, do you think I can let Ren Xiaoxia go? By the way, how did Ren Xiaoxia meet Senior Huan? Can you tell me? By Zhangnen, by treating me like this, you have completely violated the promise made to me by Senior Wan Wuxing. Tell me, do you think I can tell you anything? Ren Xiaoxia, you worry too much. I will definitely fulfill Senior Huan's promise to you. I'm just considering the consequences and want to keep Ren Xiaoxia for a few more days. Well, I forgot to tell Xiaoxia that the technique I used to seal his acupoints was left behind by the Immortal Dao. If I didn't do it myself, only Nun Jingyi and Nun Jinggang of your sect, or Elder Chang Xing of the Dalan Temple and Disher Tian of the Tenria sect can undo it. If Xiaoxia doesn't want to suffer and wants what Senior Huan promised, then answer my questions honestly. I like obedient children very much." Zhang Xiaohua felt a chill run down her spine. She seemed to think for a moment, and then told him about her trip to Huanshu. Of course, everything was simpler and more detailed than what she told Nun Jingyi. When she finished, Bai Yanqiu was surprised. "What? It's that simple? You went to that 5 elements formation and met Senior Huan? Oh, the projection of her primordial spirit? He had only said a few words and then disappeared? She also said that she wanted you to find the Shindao sect and get the secret book of peerless martial arts?" Zhang Xiaohua spread her hands and said, "That's right. Didn't Senior Huan mention it to you? Actually, I already said that I was a disciple of the Shenao sect, and I've never heard of the Shenao sect, but she didn't believe me. I couldn't do anything about it, and I don't know when she hid it on me." Bai Yanqiu stared at Zhang Xiaohua, seeming to be considering the authenticity of what he said. After a long while she said, "I don't know if what you said is true. It sounds really simple. However, I believe that you're an honest child who doesn't lie." Zhang Xiaohua was quite proud and raised her head. "Of course. Well, that's good. What Senior Huan wants to give you is the jade slip of the Immortal Dao. I'm afraid it's not useful to you, so I'll make the decision first. When I come back, I'll let you choose one of the secret books of peerless martial arts from our sect. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua frowned slightly. "Why don't you give me the things of the Immortal Dao? The jade slip of the Immortal Dao can't be seen with the naked eye. Giving it to you is like casting pearls before swine. What's the point? It's better to give you some practical benefits. Also, about that matter," Bai Yanqiu smiled mysteriously and said, "Didn't Senior Huan say it? As long as you're still alive." I'll definitely give you some benefits. As long as I'm still alive? Zhang Xiaohua was stunned, and then her face changed dramatically. She said angrily, Senior Huan's words are clear. If you don't meet Ren in your life, then you can only blame your bad luck. But look at Bai Zhongmen's actions now, he actually wants to keep Ren until. If you don't meet him in your life, won't Ren die of old age between the clouds and the water? Can't I? Bai Yanqiu was extremely surprised, but also extremely innocent. Senior Huan didn't say that I can't keep you. Moreover, I've done everything Senior Huan said exactly according to what you said. Ha! Zhang Xiaohua laughed in anger. What a good promise. Ren understands now. Maybe Senior Huan doesn't have any bad intentions, but when you make a promise, you have a countermeasure. -4. Chapter 1023. Since Ren Xiaoxia understands, I don't have to explain too much. Bai Yanqiu sneered. I heard that you have a good relationship with your senior sister Zixia. If I preach the incense cult here, I'm afraid that Jingyi won't allow it. Since you've come to between the clouds and the water, I'll leave her here. You two can live here peacefully for the rest of your lives. Won't that be great? Good plan, good plan. Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to clap her hands. All right, Ren Xiaoxia has contributed a lot to Between the Clouds and the Water. I'll definitely treat him well. If Between the Clouds and the Water can become famous in Jianghu and become the first celestial sect, half of the credit will belong to me and half to Ren Xiaoxia. When that time comes, I'll definitely. Bai Yanqiu gave her a flirtatious look. Do I still need to say it? Zhang Xiaohua had goosebumps all over her body. She almost shivered on the spot. Bai Yanqiu floated in the air and came to the outside of the main hall. Sure enough, there was no one within 1,000 feet of the main hall. Men, gather the troops from the heroes' gathering palace. I have something important to do between the clouds and the water. Immediately, there were a few drumbeats. Many disciples, old and young, male and female, came out of nowhere and swarmed into the main hall. Before everyone arrived, Bai Yanqiu asked a disciple to lead Zhang Xiaohua out. Zhang Xiaohua followed the disciple and walked slowly out of the main hall. She turned back to look at Bai Yanqiu, who looked hesitant, and the disciples who were in a hurry. She couldn't help but smile mockingly. This matter really needs to be considered carefully. Not only for Between the Clouds and the Water, but also for my beta school. Isn't this an opportunity? When Zhang Xiaohua returned to the abode, Meng was already waiting for her. She asked anxiously, What took you so long? What did the sect leader ask about? When are we going back? Zhang Xiaohua naturally wouldn't let Meng worry. She smiled and said, It's nothing. This so-called Bai Zhongmen is very interested in our incense cult. He even inquired about our senior sisters and sect leaders' daily life. You think about it, how would I know? But I was also afraid that she would come and disturb you, so I made up some nonsense. She was so confused that she thought highly of me. She even said that she wanted me to be a guardian disciple of Shiyun Club. How can I do that? How can I have the mood to drinks? Meng's here, my heart. Meng is here. Where do I have the mood to drink to the wine, eh? Pfft. Meng burst out laughing. She had long forgotten her previous worries. She pointed a finger at Zhang Xiaohua's forehead and laughed. You're so charming. Nie Qianyu from Rejuvenation Valley is still thinking about you. Zhang Pinger from Distant Fire Temple. Haha, I heard that she's become colder than before. She doesn't speak much to male disciples. Bai Zhongmen, why did he do that the moment he saw you? He eagerly gave you the position of guardian's disciple? Zhang Xiaohua rubbed her nose and said, I'm not talented. I'm better than Panin, haha. Meng seemed to really see a flower on Zhang Xiaohua's face. She laughed so hard that she almost bent over. I heard that the immortal cultivator who attacked Rejuvenation Valley was very handsome. If that immortal cultivator is you, you can say the same thing. Hee hee. Zhang Xiaohua shrugged for no reason. Anything is possible. I'm dying of laughter. If you're that handsome immortal cultivator, I might be the founder of the fragrant religion. Zhang Xiaohua was happy to see Meng laughing so hard. She chatted with her for a long time before they went to rest. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged in a quiet room. She checked her meridians. Although Bai Yanqiu used the Immortal cultivation technique to seal Zhang Xiaohua's acupoints, he couldn't bear to use the vital energy in his own meridians. Instead, he used his internal energy to simulate vital energy. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua only used the Worry-Free Heart Sutra to open one acupoint. However, Zhang Xiaohua was afraid that Bai Yanqiu would find out the next day. She immediately stopped the Heart Sutra and kept the other acupoints in a sealed state. Unexpectedly, when Zhang Xiaohua woke up the next day, she found that all the acupoints in her body had been unsealed. She could only smile bitterly and prepare to adapt. The next day, the disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water didn't disturb them. They only served them fruits, vegetables, wine, and other food. Meng Bai didn't ask anything because he and Zhang Xiaohua were by his side. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to go out and see what Bai Yanqiu was doing. However, she was afraid that there was a powerful restriction between the clouds and the water, or that Bai Yanqiu had some secret magic. Therefore, she suppressed her anxiety and found some excuses to use the bewitching pointers on the disciples who served her. She got some information from them about Between the Clouds and the Water. For 3 days in a row, Shuyuan Club seemed to be doing something big. Bai Yanqiu simply forgot Zhang Xiaohua and Meng at the back of her mind. She was busy appointing generals and dispatching troops. As for what she was busy with, the status of the disciples serving her was limited, so their knowledge was also limited. Meng was also anxious. While she nagged Zhang Xiaohua, she also urged the disciples. The disciples only smiled and didn't say a word. Meng didn't know how to deal with them, and could only look for trouble with Zhang Xiaohua. On the evening of the third day, Zhang Xiaohua found out from the disciples of Between the Clouds and the Water that most of the disciples Between the Clouds and the Water had left the island. Bai Yanqiu also left the island in the early morning of that day. As for where he went, he still didn't know. After waking the disciple, Zhang Xiaohua thought to herself. Needless to say, Bai Yanqiu must have 2 plans now. One was to return to the Jianghu, and the other was to do what Wan Wuxing said. However, she didn't hear what Wan Wuxing said. He only leaked some information in front of her. As for when and where, she didn't know. However, according to what Bai Yanqiu said, perhaps even if she waited here for a lifetime, it still wouldn't happen. Therefore, what Bai Yanqiu wanted to do this time should be to return to the Jianghu Between the Clouds and the Water. This guy actually wants to turn I into a white-bearded Zhang Xiaohua. How abominable! If I don't cause some trouble between the clouds and the water, how can I be worthy of this guy sealing I's acupoints? However, Zhang Xiaohua immediately felt depressed. On the way in from outside Between the Clouds and the Water, he could see clearly that without the guidance of the disciples Between the Clouds and the Water, he wouldn't be able to get out easily. If he wanted to get out, he could only take Ming with him and use the power of flight. However, looking at the thick smoke above the giant island, Zhang Xiaohua was almost certain that the smoke was caused by the formation. Whether the power of flight could get him out was still a problem. Forget it, let's not think too much first. Let's cause some trouble between the clouds and the water first. Zhang Xiaohua made up his mind. Just as he was thinking about what to do, he heard Meng shouting. Xiaohua, where are you? Here. I'm talking to this junior brother Between the Clouds and the Water. Zhang Xiaohua replied with a smile. Xiaohua, it's been 3 days. The time to get back to the fragrant religion is extremely tight. Why don't you hurry to find that Bai Zhangmen, Liang Tsangxiu or Li Su? Didn't you say that even if they had 10 times the courage, they wouldn't touch us? Why is it that now? I think they've already set their sights on us. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Don't worry, I've already told that disciple to go back and see Bai Zhangmen immediately. I'll let him tell Bai Zhangmen that if she still wants to make a living in Jianghu, he should quickly send us out of this place. Otherwise, the fragrant religion, the Daoan temple, and the Tenria sect will immediately unite and destroy Between the Clouds and the Water as soon as they hear the news. Ah? Meng covered her mouth and said, Xiaohua, if you say that, won't their first thought be to kill us to silence us? I'll. Zhang Xiaohua turned pale with fright and said, Isn't that so? Meng, you're really smart. I didn't think of that. Then, he muttered, But this is good too. We can't live together, but we can die together. Bah! Meng's face turned red and she spat. You're really not serious. Hurry up and catch up with that disciple. Yes, I'll go now. Zhang Xiaohua solemnly stood up and ran out of the room in a jog. Be careful. Meng's concerned words chased after Zhang Xiaohua's, but Zhang Xiaohua didn't leave the abode and he went underground. When he came out, he changed his face and looked like the handsome immortal cultivator. He hid his body and floated in the air. Zhang Xiaohua released his divine sense openly. There was a faint white fog in the air above the giant island. It was thicker than the daytime. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense was bounced back the moment it touched the fog. He couldn't leave the island. Just as Zhang Xiaohua thought, he couldn't leave the island with the flying technique. Moreover, the giant island was surrounded by ponds and there were restrictions in the ponds. Zhang Xiaohua knew only the earth and fire escape techniques. He had only heard of the water escape technique. How could he escape from the water? It seems like I have to break the restriction in the sky. Zhang Xiaohua muttered to himself for a moment before he released his divine sense to examine the origin of the smoke. Who knew that after looking at it for a long time, he only felt that the smoke was seamless without any flaws. Zhang Xiaohua also couldn't see what kind of array the smoke was, so he couldn't help but scratch his head. At this moment, in the distant lights, there was a faint sound of clappers. It seemed to be the sound of a night watch. Zhang Xiaohua's heart suddenly moved. He pinched a spell and went to the light. The light was in the main hall where Bai Yanqiu asked Zhang Xiaohua about the matter. There were many rooms and pavilions behind it. There was a large area of darkness in the brightly lit area. It was a palace with carved beams and painted pillars. However, there were very few rooms with lights. According to Zhang Xiaohua's guess, this must be Bai Yanqiu's residence. If he wanted to find out the secret of the fog array, he would have to start from Bai Yanqiu's residence. Please vote for me. Please add me to your collection. Please tip me. Thank you. -4. Chapter 1024. Before Zhang Xiaohua's figure landed, his divine sense had roughly scanned this large area. As he expected, his divine sense was bounced off at a towering palace and couldn't penetrate it. The palace was also pitch black. Zhang Xiaohua flew to the outside of the palace and looked at the closed door of the palace for a long time. He was just about to make a gesture to try to break the enchantment outside the palace, but when his gaze casually fell on the ground, his face unconsciously showed a trace of surprise. Then, regardless of the enchantment outside the palace, he just made a gesture and escaped into the ground. When he popped his head out, it was inside the enchantment. It turned out that the restriction only protected the palace above the ground, but the underground was completely unprotected. It was completely naked. Scratching his head, Zhang Xiaohua really didn't understand why this enchantment was so lame. Even the enchantment that he set up at night when he cultivated also considered the underground. It was not like this enchantment, which only cared about the head and not the butt. Most of the palace inside the enchantment was no different from an ordinary palace. It was plain and there was no fluctuation of primordial qi. Only in one of the large rooms, Zhang Xiaohua found a very obscure fluctuation. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hesitate and went straight into this room. As soon as he entered the room, a strong smell of cosmetics hit his face. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and took out the luminous pearl. With the brilliance of the luminous pearl, he could see the room clearly. The inside of this room was very luxurious. A large bed that could sleep 10 people was placed in the middle of the room. The bed looked to be made of a date red wood. Above the bed, there was a huge pink transparent cover hanging down from the thick beam of the roof of the palace, covering the entire large bed. On the large bed, there was also pink satin piled up. Whether it was the bedding or something else, it wasn't Zhang Xiaohua's concern. He looked at the row of cabinets on one side of the palace wall. The cabinets didn't have doors and were open. At a glance, he saw that the cabinets were filled with all kinds of clothes. Zhang Xiaohua scanned with his divine sense. There was no fluctuation of primordial qi, so he turned his gaze away. What was left was an extremely gorgeous dressing table on the opposite side of the cabinet. There was also a bronze mirror that was about the height of a person in front of another wall. Furthermore, there was a small bronze mirror on the dressing table. There were also a few beautiful dressing boxes. However, there were no yuan qi fluctuations from them. Did I make a mistake? Zhang Xiaohua was rather surprised. He used a seal to protect this palace, but there is nothing valuable inside. What is the meaning of this? Or does Bai Yanqiu have a way to hide the fluctuation of primordial qi? Zhang Xiaohua pinched his chin. His eyes flickered as he released his divine sense. While he was carefully inspecting, his eyes were also looking around. He first looked at the large bed. That bed was really too big. Even if Bai Yanqiu rolled on it with all his might, he wouldn't be able to roll down. Why would she sleep on such a large bed? Zhang Xiaohua was an immortal path qi practitioner. Every night, he would sit cross-legged and cultivate the Carefree Heart Sutra. Even ordinary martial arts experts would use their inner energy to replace sleep at night. For an expert like Bai Yanqiu who had stepped into the ranks of qi practitioners, there was no way he would make such a large bed just to sleep. However, when Zhang Xiaohua once again focused his attention on this somewhat overly large bed, he really did see some differences. This large bed was somewhat similar to the Kang bed in Zhang Xiaohua's Guizhuang house. The entire bed was supported by large stones. Zhang Xiaohua's face was filled with confusion. He walked to the bed, and a delicate fragrance assailed his nostrils. Zhang Xiaohua let out a laugh. He reached out and lifted the silk bedding on the bed, revealing a pitch-black stone slab that was more than 3 fingers thick under the bedding. This stone slab was different from the stones supporting it. It was a complete piece. When the brilliance of the luminous pearl shone on the pitch-black stone slab, there was no reflection at all. The light seemed to have been absorbed by the stone slab. Zhang Xiaohua reached out and touched the stone slab. The stone slab was a little rough, and it did not match the smooth surface. After Zhang Xiaohua focused his eyes on it for a moment, he vaguely saw some unfathomable flashes of light within the stone slab. It was somewhat similar to the starlight in the night sky, but in a flash, it was similar to lightning. Zhang Xiaohua touched the strange stone slab, not knowing what to say. In his divine sense, this stone slab was no different from the stones below. There was not even the slightest fluctuation of yuan qi. How could it be so different when seen with the naked eye? Whatever. Anyway, it's here to harm Bai Yanqiu. She slept under this thing every day. Needless to say, it must be something good. I'll just accept it. It's just that, this stone slab is too big. In my belt. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment, and his divine sense entered his belt. He had collected too much 5 elements chalcedony in his belt, and there was indeed less space to store things. Fortunately, the stone slab was flat, and Zhang Xiaohua only needed to tidy it up slightly to free up the space. However, just as Zhang Xiaohua placed the mysterious stone slab into his belt, another problem occurred. The stone slab was like the great wisdom sword, and could not be controlled with his divine sense. How should it be said the great wisdom sword could not be controlled with his divine sense at all? This stone slab could be grasped by his divine sense, but it gave Zhang Xiaohua the feeling of using both hands to catch a small loach in the river. It was slippery, and there was no strength at all. However, it was still almost, and not completely impossible to control. Zhang Xiaohua exerted enough patience, and expended more than half of his divine sense, and paid the price with sweat beading on his forehead. Only then did he manage to store the mysterious stone slab into his belt. It's painful but happy! Zhang Xiaohua wiped the sweat from his forehead, and smiled happily. He did not know the origin of the stone slab, and did not know its use, but, to be able to take away something that Bai Yanqiu slept under, Zhang Xiaohua would wake up smiling even in his dreams. Hee, you actually dare to turn I into white beard, Zhang Xiaohua. Even if you think about it, that won't do. I must teach you a lesson. Cough, cough, it seems to be a dream to grow old together here, and not care about the affairs of the world. Hee, it's also a happy thing. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged, and carefully operated God's guidance, gradually replenishing his divine sense. His eyes looked around the bedroom again. Bai Yanqiu was a descendant of the Shandao sect, and if it was said that there were no relics of the immortal Tao in her bedroom, and that there were no rubbish that Zhang Xiaohua liked to pick up, even if Zhang Xiaohua's head was cracked open, he would not believe it. But where were those things kept? Zhang Xiaohua's eyes looked around the bedroom again, and his divine sense swept again and again, but he did not find anything out of the ordinary. After Zhang Xiaohua looked through everything one by one, and even the undergarments and outerwear in the wardrobe, his gaze landed on the huge mirror placed at the head of the bed. According to Zhang Xiaohua's idea, there was already a bronze mirror on the dressing table, and Bai Yanqiu could already put on makeup in front of it, so there was no need to place a huge mirror at the head of the bed. Since this huge mirror was superfluous, and it was even placed at the head of the bed, what was the use of it? Needless to say, if there was something out of the ordinary, there must be something wrong with this huge mirror. However, Zhang Xiaohua stood in front of the mirror, and the light from the luminous pearl shone on the bronze mirror, and even the silk on the huge bed could be seen clearly. It was obviously a bronze mirror, right? How different could it be? Looking closer, he did not find anything. Zhang Xiaohua turned over and landed on the bed, and danced around on the bed for a while. The reflection on the bronze mirror was the same, very normal. What is going on? Zhang Xiaohua scratched his head. Could it be that Bai Yanqiu likes to see how I look when I sleep at night? This fellow's hobby is extremely wonderful. Unwilling to give up, Zhang Xiaohua covered the bronze mirror with his divine sense from top to bottom, and wanted to do a final check, but it was still to no avail. There seemed to be no movement, and there seemed to be no sign of it. Perhaps Bai Yanqiu kept the things close and put them somewhere else. Zhang Xiaohua muttered in his heart as he prepared to leave the bedroom. However, when he accidentally caught sight of the small bronze mirror on the dressing table from the corner of his eye, he immediately froze on the spot as though he had been struck by lightning. Everyone, what do you think? It turned out that the small bronze mirror also faintly reflected Zhang Xiaohua's face, but that face was Zhang Xiaohua disguised as Pan An's handsome face. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the huge bronze mirror in disbelief, and the reflection in the bronze mirror was actually a complete Zhang Xiaohua. In an instant, a feeling of horror rose from the bottom of Zhang Xiaohua's heart. This bronze mirror could actually reflect his original appearance. It was no wonder he just stood in front of this huge bronze mirror for a long time, and the mirror was filled with Zhang Xiaohua. It was originally him, so there was nothing to be suspicious about. If not for the small mirror, he almost forgot that he disguised as Pan An. This is it! Zhang Xiaohua was very happy, and with a sweep of his divine sense, he was about to put the large bronze mirror into his belt. However, the bronze mirror seemed to have grown roots, and no matter how Zhang Xiaohua moved it with his divine sense, it did not move an inch. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua was angry. He walked to the front of the bronze mirror, bent down, and grabbed the bottom edge of the bronze mirror. Using the strength of his arms, he lifted it up stiffly. The strength of Zhang Xiaohua's arms could be said to be shocking, but the bronze mirror only shook slightly, and he could not lift it up completely. Zhang Xiaohua was once again in a difficult position. Then Zhang Xiaohua circled the large bronze mirror a few times, his hand holding his chin, and his eyes darting around. After half a cigarette, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something. Looking at the huge bronze mirror, he stretched out his hand and took out the small mirror that he inherited from the incense sect, which was called the Hao Tian mirror by Nun Jing Gang. Who knew, when the Hao Tian mirror was taken out of the money bag, Zhang Xiaohua immediately lost control of it, and it flew out of his hand in midair. -4. Chapter 1025. After Zhang Xiaohua took out the clear sky mirror from her purse, it immediately flew out of Zhang Xiaohua's hand and hovered in midair. The clear sky mirror slowly floated in midair and stopped in the middle of the large copper mirror. Then, the surface of the clear sky mirror faced upwards and gradually emitted a silvery white brilliance. This brilliance became increasingly resplendent and bright. When the brilliance gathered to a certain extent, it formed a weak light pillar. The light pillar slowly dimmed and elongated, shining towards the ceiling of the bedroom. When the light pillar shone, the ceiling of the bedroom seemed to be transparent, revealing the thick fog in the night sky outside. Then, the fog melted like snow in boiling water, revealing a huge round hole in the resplendent stars in the night sky. After a few breaths, the stars in the round hole suddenly flashed rapidly. A crazy amount of star energy rushed into the clear sky mirror as if it was smashing down. The clear sky mirror buzzed and let out a joyful sound, as if it was absorbing the starlight in the sky. After the time it took to eat a meal, the clear sky mirror gradually stopped shaking. Then, it tilted slightly and gradually faced the large copper mirror in front of the bed. Immediately, the starlight was reflected by the clear sky mirror. The large copper mirror did not have any reaction at first, and the starlight was not reflected again. Even Zhang Xiaohua's figure in the large copper mirror disappeared. Gradually, a silvery white dot appeared in the middle of the large copper mirror. That dot grew bigger and bigger. When it was the size of a copper coin, it stopped expanding and turned into ripples that spread across the entire copper mirror. Then, the surface of the copper mirror rippled like the surface of a lake. After rippling for a few rounds, the silvery white dot gradually expanded. This time, it only stopped expanding when it was the size of the clear sky mirror. At this moment, the surface of the copper mirror stopped rippling. Instead, it slowly twisted and the circle in the middle became brighter. When it was as bright as a small full moon, the floating clear sky mirror turned again and faced the circle on the copper mirror. At this moment, the light beam from the clear sky mirror disappeared. The starlight that filled the sky also stopped pouring down. The entire ceiling of the bedroom returned to its original state, leaving only the brilliance of the large copper mirror and the clear sky mirror. The brilliance of the two mirrors illuminated the entire bedroom as if it was daytime. Zhang Xiaohua squinted her eyes and carefully observed the silver brilliance of the clear sky mirror and the circle on the copper mirror. The two lights reflected on each other, as if they were communicating. After a few breaths, the brilliance of the two mirrors suddenly became so bright that it dazzled Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. She closed her eyes naturally. The moment Zhang Xiaohua closed her eyes, the clear sky mirror moved forward silently. In an instant, it crossed the distance between the two mirrors and disappeared into the large copper mirror. When Zhang Xiaohua opened her eyes again, the clear sky mirror had already disappeared. The silvery white brilliance of the large copper mirror gradually dimmed. Even the circle in the middle gradually shrank. "Oh, where's my small mirror?" Zhang Xiaohua shouted and flew to the front of the copper mirror. "Did it get eaten by the large mirror? Shit, I went for wool but came home shorn. I've suffered a huge loss this time." Just as Zhang Xiaohua was feeling regretful, the circle on the copper mirror disappeared. With a clear "chi" sound, the large copper mirror swayed slightly. Then there was a "chi chi chi" sound. The entire chamber was shaking. The large copper mirror in front of Zhang Xiaohua slowly shrank. When it shrank to a certain extent, there was a hole that was about the height of a person in the wall that was previously covered by the copper mirror. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have time to look at the hole. Instead, she focused on the shrinking copper mirror. The copper mirror looked different from before. There were some decorations on the round surface of the mirror that were made of an unknown material. It surrounded the entire supreme sky mirror, forming a rectangle. There were mysterious patterns carved on the surrounding materials. The patterns formed extremely profound talismans. Between the patterns there were countless tiny tadpole-like carvings. On the top of the circular mirror, there were 3 tadpole-like words. However, these 3 words weren't the ancient words that Zhang Xiaohua was familiar with. She couldn't understand the meaning of these words. "Supreme Sky Mirror?" Zhang Xiaohua pursed her lips and read it out loud. The clear sky mirror continued to shrink until it was 30 centimeters in size. Then, a purple light flashed again, and an extremely desolate aura was emitted from the clear sky mirror. After a flash, the clear sky mirror floated in the air again. Looking at the supreme sky mirror that had returned to its original state, Zhang Xiaohua reached out her hand without hesitation. She grabbed the supreme sky mirror and flipped it around. Then she immersed her divine sense into it. It had the same reaction as the small mirror in the past. It didn't seem to have any reaction. Zhang Xiaohua in the supreme sky mirror had returned to her original appearance, as Zhang Xiaohua. Scratching her head, Zhang Xiaohua kept the supreme sky mirror in her coin pouch. Then she looked at the hole that was covered by the large mirror. Needless to say, the large mirror was a part of the supreme sky mirror, and was used as a restriction on the hole. Now that the large mirror and the small mirror had combined to form the supreme sky mirror, the hole was naturally exposed. Furthermore, the hole was definitely the place that Zhang Xiaohua had been looking for. Using her divine sense to probe the hole, Zhang Xiaohua frowned. Her divine sense could only see 3 feet in front of her. There must be a restriction on her divine sense. Zhang Xiaohua reached out her hand and took out Chasing Dream. Then, she flew into the hole. The hole was similar to the tunnels that Zhang Xiaohua had seen before. They all led downwards. However, this tunnel was made of green bricks. It seemed to be man-made. There were burning torches in the passageway, illuminating the entire passageway. However, after walking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua found that the entire passageway was quiet, without the slightest movement. Soon after, there were forks in the tunnel. There were small huts on both sides of the tunnel. Zhang Xiaohua carefully pushed open one of the huts. There was only a simple praying mat inside. There was nothing else. Zhang Xiaohua walked along the passageway and only picked up the things that could go down. After the time it took to eat a meal, he arrived at a place that looked a little run down. It was only run down that the green bricks were gone, and the passageway had turned into stone walls and mud. Moreover, there were fewer torches here, making it look very dark. After turning a corner, a small space appeared in front of Zhang Xiaohua. There were no more tunnels in this space. There were only 3 small doors on the left, right, and front. Each door looked exactly the same. There was a torch hanging on the wall in front of each door. Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to scan the area 3 feet around her. She didn't find anything special. The small doors also blocked her divine sense. Hence, she hesitated for a moment. Then, she cautiously pushed open the small door on her left hand. The small door opened silently. Zhang Xiaohua held Chasing Dream in her hand and quickly scanned the interior. She didn't see anyone. Then, she jumped in and closed the door behind her. The interior of the door wasn't spacious. It was only 2 feet square. At this moment, there were no torches hanging on the wall. Instead, there were fist-sized luminous pearls embedded on the wall. There were so many of them that the entire room was brightly lit. Zhang Xiaohua stood at the door and looked around. There were 3 rows and 4 rows of jade tables in the entire room. There were jade scrolls, magic tools, and jade bottles on each table. They were placed neatly. Ha! Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to cover her mouth and laugh. I finally found the place! Zhang Xiaohua had picked up a lot of trash. She wanted to enter the secret room of a large immortal sect and find so many treasures. This was the first time in history. How could she not be happy? Rubbing her hands, Zhang Xiaohua walked to the jade table closest to her. There was a half-moon-shaped jade pendant here. The luster was a little dim, but the edges of the half-moon shape faintly flashed with a silver luster. It should be a magic tool with some history. However, when Zhang Xiaohua reached out to take it, she was blocked by a layer of restriction on the outside of the magic tool. Ouch! Zhang Xiaohua patted her head and said secretly, Extreme joy begets sorrow. How did I forget about divine sense? When she released her divine sense, she realized that there was no restriction on divine sense in the entire room. On each of the 12 jade tables, there was a different layer of restriction that firmly protected the things on the table. These restrictions were different from what Zhang Xiaohua had seen before. What was the difference? It was very simple. In the past, Zhang Xiaohua had seen that most of the restrictions were weak in primordial qi, which weakened the power of the restrictions a lot. Sometimes, Zhang Xiaohua could break the restrictions almost effortlessly. But the restrictions here had abundant primordial qi fluctuations. They were not affected by the lack of primordial qi of heaven and earth at all. Alas! Zhang Xiaohua sighed and checked the 12 different restrictions one by one. She sighed in her heart, and felt very regretful. Since she came into contact with the Immortal Tao, the history of breaking the old restrictions casually was probably gone forever. In the future, she really had to rely on her own strength to really break the restrictions. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua waved her left hand and stabbed out with a nameless sword move. Sure enough, there was no primordial qi flow. Presumably, the primordial qi flow had already been consumed when she broke the restriction of the dragon vein. However, looking at so many things, she couldn't take any of them. It really made Zhang Xiaohua feel unreconciled in her heart. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua did a little comparison and walked to a stone table on the right side of one of the stone tables. There was a lonely jade slip on it. The restriction on it emitted a faint blue light. Her divine sense felt that this restriction was a little familiar, and the primordial qi fluctuation inside was a little weaker than the other restrictions. Presumably, it was not important. Rubbing her chin and pondering for a while, Zhang Xiaohua took out a fire talisman from her arms and threw it on the table. The flame produced by the fire talisman was extinguished immediately after it ignited slightly. -4. You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.